Hey, welcome back to Tier Mania, and today we've got a doozy. We've got a big one. Today we are going to be ranking every single rap album. Now, before we get into it, just a quick disclaimer. Obviously, I have not listened to every rap album that has ever came out, so this is just going off of rap albums that I know and albums that I've listened to in my 24 years of life. So keep that in mind. Two, it's only rap albums I've listened to, so there's going to be a lot of artists here that you may say, oh, how do you not have this album here? How do you not have this album here? I just don't like them, or I don't listen to them. So like in the chance of someone like Future or Gunna or Lil Uzi, or there's just like some artists that like I don't really rock with personally. Not to say that they're bad or their projects are bad. It's just, hey, I've never listened fully to their discography. I've probably heard a bunch of songs by them and stuff, but not enough to fully rank it. So I didn't want to rank something that I don't know enough about. So this is only albums that I've heard, but as you can see, I think it's a decent amount of rap albums so far. It's going to be spanning from anywhere from the 80s to 90s all the way up to our current year. So that's what we're doing. Let's go ahead and get into the rankings. So for stuff like this, it's a lot of people saying like, oh, this is overrated, this is mid, whatever. So I wanted to switch up the tiers a little bit, make it a little bit different from all the other tier lists you've probably seen. So the rankings we're working with, of course, at the top we have the GOAT, greatest of all time. I think that's self-explanatory. Next is classics. Like, they're still amazing projects. It's just they're not like the GOAT projects, but they are classics. Next up is great, just great all-around projects. Next one is just like slept on or underappreciated albums, just like it just needs more attention. After that, we've got the very solid tier. Just, you know, very solid, nothing crazy, but it is a good project. And then from there, we have the more negative tiers, which is, again, I didn't want to be too mean, because for the most part, for most of these albums, I do like them all. If I don't like an album, I'm not going to listen to the entire thing multiple times enough to rank it. At least that's just how I view art and music. But next up, we have the could have been better tier. Again, pretty self-explanatory. Not like all the way bad. It just, you know, there's a lot that could have been better there. And then of course we have not the best, which is, you know, it's basically our bad, or like our D tier, for example. And at the bottom, of course, we have Yikes, which is, you know, the worst that's going to be on this list. So yeah, without further ado, as far as like what the criteria is for this, for a lot of our other tier lists on Tier Mania, we try to be more objective, but I think after the music tier list that we did a year or so ago, it's impossible. You gotta just be subjective with this kind of stuff, at least in my opinion. So with all of that said, keep in mind, all of this is just my personal opinion. So if you disagree, I would love to know why. Tell me in the comments. I love seeing you guys' opinions. Yeah, without further ado, let's get straight into it. Starting off with West Side Gun, Air Maze 8. For this, I'm counting both sides, both the B-side. And I honestly, like, it's close. It is very close. I think it's already great. Like, there are so many good songs in this project. And again, like, I'm going to get into this more later when we talk about all of Griselda. But it's just like, they've just nailed the formula that they do so well. And you know what they're going to bring, and it's always going to be good. Over that Derringer and Alchemist and, what's his name? Conductor's production. West Side is just like the brains behind Griselda's operation, and just gets all these amazing artists to come on and do their thing. And Air Maze 8 is no exception. This album slaps. I just saw Griselda in concert a week or so ago when they came to Atlanta, and it was super awesome. So yeah, nothing but good things to say about this album. Best songs, probably Mariota, Right Now, and Hell on Earth Part 2 are probably the best for me. Next up, we have the Big Fish Theory by Vince Staples. And I think this goes in the could have been better tier. I think Vince Staples is honestly one of the most like consistent rappers we have currently. But this album is probably it might be the one of all of his albums that I go back to the least. Like, yes, there were some good songs. I liked Yeah Right. Kendrick was doing a single on that track. 745 is a really chill track. But for the most part, I just was like, I felt very underwhelmed from this album. Again, not to say that it was bad, because I think like all of Vince's albums are good. But for Vince's standard, he could have done more with this one. At least that's how I feel. Next up is 1999 by Joey Badass. And I'm tempted to put it into classic because I do think it's really, really good. But I think it just goes at the top of great tier. I've heard a lot of discourse about it, and I think it's really interesting because it's been so long now that I've seen a lot of people talking about like how Joey Badass has never lived up to the potential he showed on this mixtape. And I think it's too early to call that because he's still got a lot of time. But like, he started things off with a bang with this mixtape. like it's 1999 goes crazy. It's just like the exact kind of like boom bap chill rap that you'd want to hear if you grew up on 90s rappers and stuff. And he kills it. Songs like Funky Hose and Waves are just like the chillest songs you'll hear. You can just listen to them on repeat. And the whole project is worth a listen. So shout out Joey Badass. Next up we have Taboo by Denzel Curry. And I also think this album is great. Denzel Curry, again, is also... I mean, we kind of started off with 3 really consistent rappers, or 4 really consistent rappers. Denzel is also one of the most consistent rappers in the game. I probably shouldn't say that much, because now it just sounds like it's being overused. But Denzel is fantastic. This album is wild. It is so good. It's one of his best, for sure. I do think he has an album better than this that we'll get to. But this song's, it's got like tons of deep conceptual stuff on it, great lyricism. Some of the beats go crazy, and then you got bangers like Black Balloons and Clout Cobain and Sirens with Jid and all that stuff. So it's a great project. If you haven't heard it already, I don't know what you're doing. It's one of the best albums of that year. Shout out Denzel Curry. Next up we have For Your Eyes Only. And so we're getting to J. Cole. Jermaine Cole. But for this one, I think I'm tempted to put it and could have been better, but I think it's very solid. Like, this album got a lot of hate when it came out, and it's definitely not his best. I think we all know this is not J. Cole's best album. But it's still got some good songs in there. I really love Changes. That's probably the song I go back to the most. This might be like J. Cole's most like lyricist album. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on on this project, and he's doing his thing, but it's just missing that like that bump in the whip factor, I guess, if you're a fan of dead end hip hop. There's something missing from this. It could have been better, but for what we got, it's still good. Again, you got stuff like Changes, like Neighbors. Some really good songs in here. But then you also have your Folding Clothes and stuff like that. So it's just, you know, for J. Cole, it's kind of middle of the road. But for most other artists, it's still a great album. So I think it goes in very solid. But again, I think it could have been a little better. Next up, we have the Carter 4. Shout out Lil Wayne. And I think this also goes into very solid. Again, I feel very similarly about For Your Eyes Only and Carter 4. Like, I think it's not his worst album, it's not his best album, it's got some good songs, but like, how often, of all of Lil Wayne's songs, or of all of Lil Wayne's albums, how often do you come back to the Carter 4? You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's got 6 foot, 7 foot, so that's pretty, that alone is pretty good. But I also liked the track with Bruno Mars, and there's a few other singles I liked. But for the most part, I think there's a lot better Lil Wayne out there, if we're being honest. Not to say that it's a bad album. Next up, we have Black on Both Sides by Mos Def. This is obviously a classic. I think most people can agree. This is one of, if not Mos Def's best albums. Mos Def's one of the best hip-hop artists ever. And this is no exception. Album goes crazy. Got tons of classics on here. My favorite songs are obviously Miss Fat Booty, Love, the song with Talib Kweli. There's a lot to love here. It's a classic. There's only so much I can say about it that hasn't already been said. But it's Mos Def doing Mos Def things. Like, how could you not love it if you're a fan of rap, you know? Next up, we have Flower Boy by Tyler, the Creator. And listen, Tyler, in these past 3 albums he's made, has been on a run. And honestly, I don't know if this is a hot take or not. I think it's a classic already. Like, I think this is a amazing album. This took Tyler and sent him off from like a pretty prominent rapper in the game to one of, if not the best rapper in the game now. Like, sent his trajectory to where he is now. It's insane. Like, what Tyler fans looked like before this, and then what Tyler fans look like after this, wild. But it's a phenomenal album. Like, every song goes crazy. You've got ton of his best, or like not best, but his biggest songs are on here, like See You Again, 911. You got bangers like Glitter and Boredom, and there's like every song is so good, so catchy, and meaningful, and plays into the narrative. What more could you want from an album? I don't know. So I think it's a classic already. That might be a little too high, but that's just how I feel. Next up, we've got 17 by XXX Tentacle, XXX Tactical Nuke, RIP, XXX Tentacion. And I think it could have been better. It's not terrible. Like, I don't get the hate for this album. Like, I know it's like very edgy and very sad and stuff, but like, it's got good songs on it. Like, Jocelyn Flores is on this album, and I think that's one of the most streamed songs ever, which is kind of wild for the content in that song. But it's not as bad as everyone says it is. It's really not. Like, I think a lot of people hate on X just to hate on X, because I mean, you know, people that are super edgy, it's easy to hate on them. But it's not as bad as everyone says it is. Like, it's got some solid songs in there. There's a couple other songs that I like. I'm a little biased because I love Shiloh Dynasty, so any like sample of them I'm gonna love. But it's a solid project. That's not terrible. It just could have been better, you know. There are some flaws on it for sure. Next up, we have All American Badass by Joey Badass, and I think it's very solid. It's at the top of very solid. This is one of those albums that when it came out, I love this album. I was like, oh my god, this album of the year. This is so good. Da 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 da. But like, over time, I go back to it less and less, and I'm kind of surprised by that. There's still some really good songs on it. Like, obviously, Devastated, Temptation. My favorite song, Rockabye Baby, with Schoolboy Q. But it's just, I don't know. There's, again, going back to that thing of like, I feel like Joey Badass could be doing more. Like, for such a big topic of like America bad, like, there's a lot you could say there, and I feel like there could have been more there. You know, it's hard to explain. I feel like I'm not articulating very well, but I don't think we've seen peak Joey Badass yet. You know, he's got more in the tank, and only time will tell. So, but for now, All American Badass, very solid project, but I don't think it's that crazy, personally. Next up, we have Born Sinner, and there's a lot of different categories this can go in, because very similar to All American Badass, this is one of those albums that over time I either really like it or I really don't like it. Like, there's a couple songs that did not age well, but there's a couple songs that are still really, really good. Oh man, so I think it's gonna go at the top of very solid as well. Just because, like, for me, it's so hit or miss. Like, songs like She Knows, Crooked Smile, I absolutely love, and then songs like Villuminati and like Let Nas Down, and I'm just like, like, it's so hit or miss for me. So I think it has to go like towards the middle, because the highs are really high, but the lows are pretty low as well. I do think it's overall a better project than For Your Eyes Only, but I wouldn't say it's like slept on, though, is the thing, because like, I think most people know about Born Sinner, but you know, it's not all the way there for me. I think it could have been a lot better, personally. But again, it's, you know, with these bigger artists, we're holding them to higher standards, you know what I mean? I'm expecting more from a J. Cole than I'm expecting from a Gunna, you know what I mean? So keep that in mind. This is all relative to the artist, not like everything. Next up, we have Graduation. It's a classic. It's gotta be a classic. Graduation is wild. To have songs like Flashing Lights, Can't Tell Me Nothing, I Wonder, all on the same album, and then still have songs like Stronger and Everything I Am, and all that is crazy. Like, it's wild. Every day that passes, I feel like Kanye is the GOAT more and more. It's crazy. I still think Kendrick is the GOAT for now, but you know, that's another topic for another day. Graduation, obviously a classic. Amazing songs. Yes, there are some bad ones. You got your Drunken Hot Girls, your Barry Bonds, whatever. But I think the highs way outshine the lows on this album. Like, it's just like every other song is like a timeless classic. It's crazy. It's crazy. Next up, we got Die Lit from Playboi Carti. And I think it's a mixtape. I don't know if it's actually an album. But I honestly think it's great. I really do. Carti's music in general is so hard to explain. Like, it's like, I know everyone's just like, oh, Carti's just vibes. And I guess that's the best way to describe it. But like, man, there's just something about Carti's music that goes crazy. Like, I don't know what it is. But Carti's music is wild. And Die Lit has a ton of good songs. And the thing, I think a lot of us know, like, okay, with Carti's music, a lot of it is the instrumentals, it's the beats, it's production, Pierre doing his thing. But like the features on this album are crazy. Like, this man got like every relevant artist on this album in 2018, like before Magnolia, which is wild. So shout out Playboi Carti. I think this is a great project, and it's just a lot of the beats I really like personally. But I mean, it's Die Lit, you know. It's a great project. Next up, we got Rodeo by Travis Scott, and it might be a little unfair to Travis because I think with all the things that happened at Astroworld, it's like put a damper on his entire discography for me. I know it's like, you should separate the artist from the music, but it's just like, ever since all that stuff happened, it's a lot harder for me to bump his music. I don't know. That probably shouldn't be a reason to rate his music lower, but it's just, for me, since this is my list and it's very subjective, like, I want to listen to Travis Scott a lot less. But I do think this is still a great album, though, for sure. I think a lot of people will say this is his best, other than another one that we'll get to. And I mean, this album has 90210 on it. Like, classic. Like, what? Like, it's got a lot of good stuff. This felt like the first album that made Travis Scott, you know? So that's a huge plus. And I mean, Travis Scott has influenced so much in music, and this was the first one that really, like, let that influence reign, if that makes any sense. It probably doesn't. I might just be rambling, but Rodeo is a great album. So that was a lot of words just to say that. Anyway, 2014 Forest Hills Drive by J. Cole. I also think this is a classic. I do. I really do. It's, as much as I've been pretty hard on J. Cole throughout this list, this album is near perfect. Obviously, it's a meme, double platinum, no features, blah, blah, blah. But, like, it's so good. I literally have it on my wall back there. I have, like, a wall of vinyls over here. And this is one of them. Like, just so many good tracks. So many good tracks. You got Apparently. You got No Role Models, GOMD, Fire Squad. Like, just, like, every song. There's no skips on this album. There's no skips. And usually for J. Cole, there's one or two. So, like, shout out Jermaine Cole doing his thing. Because I truly think this is his best album. And it's a phenomenal project, for sure. Next up, we have The Melodic Blue by Baby Keem. And listen. Listen. This is probably gonna get me a lot of hate. I can feel the dislikes coming in right now. I wasn't a fan. I was not a fan of this album. I tried so hard. I listened to it like 5 times, and I just don't get it. Maybe I just don't get it. Like, I know a lot of people feel like that about Carti and more like more current artists that just like it's just not for me. That's kind of how I feel about Baby Keem. Like, I'm telling you, I want to like this album. I do. But like, it just doesn't sound good to me. Like, the first half of the album, I was not rocking with. The only songs I come back to off of this are Lost Souls, and I'm pretty sure Family Ties is on. I might be tripping. I'm pretty sure Family Ties is on this. Either that or it's a single. But like, I don't know. I don't get it. Like, cause on certain songs, like Family Ties, like Praise God off Donda, Keem is going crazy. Like, he obviously has so much potential to be one of the best artists we've ever seen. Like, he's got it. But then on other tracks, it sounds terrible. So I'm like, what are we doing with this? I don't know. So again, I want to like this album. I know a lot of people love it and say it's one of the best albums of the year, but I don't know. Someone explain to me what I'm missing with this, because I feel like it's just going right over my head, and I don't know. Melodic Blue, I feel like it could have been better, but hey, that's just me. That's just my opinion. Next up, we got 808s and Heartbreak. It's close to classic. It's very, very, very close to classic. I'm gonna put it in great, because I think just compared to all of other Kanye stuff, it's not as good. But it's still like very clearly one of the most influential albums ever made. It's obviously got some amazing singles, amazing tracks, and it completely changed rap. So like, obviously it's a very good album. It's just for Kanye specifically. I know he could do better. So I think it's just great. I don't think it's a classic, but if you were to say that this is a classic, I wouldn't like fight you on it. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's understandable to call it a classic. It's just, for me, I think it's just great. Which is still great. Don't get me wrong. I don't think calling it great is a bad thing. Next up, we have the Slim Shady LP from Eminem. And I think, very obviously, this is also a classic. I don't think it's all the way in the GOAT tier, personally. Obviously, Eminem is one of the best rappers ever, but this album specifically, I don't think is GOAT tier yet. Or not yet, but I don't think it is, or it will be. Like, obviously, you got songs like Guilty Conscience, My Name Is, Just Don't Give a Fuck, stuff like that. But I think there is better Eminem out there. But this is obviously some of his best work. This is peak, or close to peak Eminem. It's the Slim Shady LP, man. What more can you say about it? Next up, we have Because the Internet by Childish Gambino. And this is where my complete personal bias comes in, because this is my favorite album of all time. So, not to say that it should be yours, but for me, this is my favorite album of all time. So, of course, it's going in the greatest of all time. Listen, I won't go into it too much because I could talk about this album forever, but every song bangs. There's no skips. The screenplay is amazing. And I can't express how much an artist like Donald Glover did for me growing up as a light-skinned young man, hearing another. I mean, Donald Glover isn't really a light skin, I don't think, but he acts like he's a light skin in his music. So I resonated and connected with it a lot. So his music just did so much for me growing up, and to like hear that was just like a huge confidence boost. And then on top of that, this album bangs. It's insane. Every song is a banger. Telegraph Ave is one of the best songs I've ever heard. Or Oakland, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing. I wish Gambino kept rapping and he didn't go to R&B, but hey, you know, everyone changes, everyone progresses. What can you do? Next up, we got Under Pressure by Logic, and even though I think it's been talked about a lot, I still think this album is slept on. I do think it's underappreciated. It's a really, really solid album. I think the more time goes on, the more I like this album. And like it's wild to listen to it now, compared to like all of the memes of where Logic is currently. But like this is a really, really, really solid album. Gang Related is probably my favorite song off it. The beat's really good. Logic's rapping is really good. And he's not doing the corny Logic stuff yet, which is great. So it's a really good album. Like, if you haven't heard it, or you haven't heard it in a while, go back and listen to it. It's slept on. But next up is Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick. I think this is not only a classic, but also one of the greatest albums of all time. It's kind of wild. I'm putting Because the Internet over it just because that's my personal bias, but I do think objectively this is a better album than Because the Internet. And it's just like, again, with some of these albums, like, what is there to say that hasn't been said already? It's Kendrick telling an amazing story about his own life. It's all connected. All the songs bang. And you got songs like Money Trees. I mean, like, Kendrick really put songs like Money Trees, Sing About Me, and Backseat Freestyle on the same album. And those aren't even, like, the most streamed songs, too, which is crazy. So, shout out Kendrick. Obviously, he's one of, if not the GOAT. Amazing project. Next up is Bad Meets Evil. This is one just like I remember listening to this album like while I was playing Call of Duty and like Halo 3. Like this is just a personal album for me. I don't think it like stacks up with most of these albums on this list. But it's not the best. It's really not the best. But hey, it's got some fun songs. It's got Lighters with Bruno Mars and like a couple other singles. It's really not very good, but I liked it a lot, so I listened to it like a bunch growing up. Like I literally bought this album, so it's got to be on my list. But you know, it's Bad Meets Evil. You know what I mean? Not the best. Next up, we've got Mirrorland by Earth Gang, and I think this is definitely slept on. Most of Earth Gang stuff is slept on. This album is really, really good. Like, I'm telling you, it gets better with time. Obviously, I'm biased because I'm living in Atlanta. So, like, of course, Atlanta artists are going to hit different for me. But, like, you got songs like Top Down. I guess I can't listen to any other songs. This Side. There's a couple other songs. There's A Bank. It's a really, really solid album. There's a lot of good songs on it. Again, I just, you know, I think Earth Gang is still coming into their own, and like we haven't seen the best of them yet. So I'm excited to see what Earth Gang does in the future. But for now, Mirrorland is very slept on. Definitely check it out if you haven't heard it. Next up, we have AT-Aliens by Outkast. Obviously, this is a classic. I don't think I really need to say much more. Again, I just talked about being in Atlanta. Of course, I'm gonna like AT-Aliens. Favorite song is AT-Aliens. But like for classic albums, I will say I definitely don't go back to this one as much as I think other people do. I don't think this is Outkast's best album. But like obviously both of them are flowing, doing their thing. The beats are good. It's just for me personally, it's not my favorite album by them. But it's still a classic. Obviously one of the best albums ever made, or rap albums ever made. Not too much to say about it. It's AT-Aliens. Speaking of classics, now we have My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, which, spoiler alert, I'm pretty sure this is going to be number one on my list out of all of them. This album is insane, like absolutely no skips. Every song is incredible. The production is insane. This is peak Kanye. Like only Kanye could have made this album. All the features go crazy as well. The only song I don't really like is Hell of a Life, but even then, like I still like it as like an Iron Man tribute and whatnot. And just like Kanye really put Devil in a New Dress and Runaway on the same album. That's wild. That's wild. And then you still got Monster, which is maybe the best feature ever, ? And Lost in the World and Power, and like we don't need to talk about it. Dark Fantasy is just insane. Too many Urkels on your team. That's why your win's low. Enough said. Next up, we have The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill by Lauryn Hill. And obviously, I think this is a classic. But I also think it's one of the greatest of all time. For sure. I mean, again, Lauryn Hill really put X Factor, Nothing Even Matters, and Doo-Wop on the same album. That's crazy. That's crazy. So many good tracks. It's incredible. It just, it never gets old. You could always put it on. Bumps in a whip, the whole thing. It's amazing. So it's Lauryn Hill, man. Where else would it be? Next up, we've got The Pink Print by Nicki Minaj. Honestly, I think it's pretty solid. Like, I'm kind of shook. I didn't think it would be this high, but like it's not bad. Like it's got some fun songs on it. I go back to it a lot more than I thought I would, and like Nicki's doing her thing on this album. All the features do well. All the beats are really good. This is maybe Nicki's best produced album? ? But like it's really solid. Like if you haven't heard this album in a while, go back, check it out. Like it's almost in the slept on underrated tier. I don't think it's that good, but it's close. Like it's a solid album. Shout out Nicki Minaj. Next up we have this Watsky album. I think I don't even remember what it's called, but which I guess says a lot. But I do think it could have been better. I'm a big Watsky fan. I started loving his music ever since I saw him on Epic Rap Battles of History. And I really, really like him. I think he's a really solid artist, especially like as like a YouTube internet artist. I think he's killing it. But like for this album, like there were some really solid tracks. Never Let It Die. I think he had Anderson .Paak as a feature, which is wild, like to think about. And Whoa, Whoa, Whoa. The poetry track that he has, like it's got a lot of that good Watsky stuff that you're looking for. I just don't think it's as like great of an all-around project as stuff he's done before, which we'll get to. But like it's okay. It's nothing crazy. Like I definitely don't go back to this album that much, but there are a few standout tracks. So I think it deserves a spot on this list personally. Next up we've got Donda. And it's tricky. It's tricky on where to rank Donda. But I think it's slept on. Even though it's only been out for a year, I think it's slept on. I think it's very underappreciated. I agree with what the YouTuber Rough Criminal said about it, which is like, I think with Donda, this is one of those albums that is obviously very personal to Kanye, but is also very personal to the viewer, and your enjoyment of Donda is based on how much you want to get out of it, which is very weird to say about an album. But like, if you just take your favorite tracks and just listen to those, like, and just don't even regard any other part of the album, it's an amazing album. It's just, what are those tracks for you, and at what point does that cut off? You know what I mean? Because if it's only like 2 or 3 songs, obviously it wouldn't be that great of an album to you. But if it's like 12 songs that you really, really like, and then you just cut out all the filler, like that's an amazing album. 12 songs of bangers is great. So it really, I think it depends on the person. But for me, I really enjoyed it. I do think it could have been better. Like it's not peak Kanye by any means. But there are some really, really great tracks. My favorites are 24, which I don't know why. Like over time, I love 24. I keep going back to that song for some reason. Moon, obviously Praise God, Off the Grid, all that stuff. Keep My Spirit Alive, Believe What I Say, all that stuff. So I think it's really underappreciated. A lot of people are calling this album mid or bad or whatever. I do not think that at all. It just takes some getting used to, you know? It takes some getting used to. So, next up we have 2.5 by Amine. I think this one is also super slept on. I become more of an Amine fan every project he drops. I don't know what it is. Like he has the exact style I'm looking for, of just like raps well, is lyrical, but not like too lyrical, spiritual, miracle about it. Has really good production, and is just consistent. Like he just constantly makes really solid music. All of his stuff is super catchy. And this might be his most catchy project, like between Charmander, Colors, Between the Lines, Twisted, like there's just a lot of really fun tracks. It's nothing crazy. It's not gonna blow your mind, but it's just like, hey, if you want some chill music to listen to, pop this mixtape on. It's a good time. So, shout out to Amine. If you don't listen to him already, check him out. He's great. Speaking of Amine, we got another one. We have 1.5. I think these are just the names of his mixtapes in between his albums. And this one is also slept on. Like, I'm telling you. Amine's stuff is really good. I don't think it's better than any of these albums. But it does have Dr. Whoever and Reel It In. What more do you need? You know, those are some amazing songs. So shout out to Amine. Again, his mixtapes are just really fun. I think 1.5 has like more substance to it than 2.5, but 2.5's got a lot more like bangers. But they still are both very, very solid projects. So next up we have Damn by Kendrick. And it's tough. It's tricky. I could see the argument for it being a classic, but for me, I think it's at the top of great. It's close. I think it's really close to being a classic, and it's one of those cases where, like, similar to 808s, if you wanted to also, hold on, I think 808s is better than 1999. If you wanted to argue, like, Damn is a classic, I wouldn't fight you on it. But for me, I think it's just lacking on that. Obviously, you have some amazing tracks like Duckworth, DNA, Humble, like some of Kendrick's biggest songs. But even though there is that theme going, Kendrick has set the bar so incredibly high that it's hard to always live up to that. Even though this is still a phenomenal project for any artist other than Kendrick, they would have made it. But for Kendrick standards, I think there's better. There's better Kendrick out there. I don't think that's a super hot take. But, you know, I don't think this is a classic just yet. I think we need to wait a little bit more. Maybe in like 5 years looking back on it, we'll be like, oh my God, this is obviously a classic. But for now, I think it's just great. Which is still a great place to be. It's at the top of the tier list. It's just not like all the way at the top. Next up we have Astro World by Travis. And for me personally, I am not the biggest fan of it, but I do think it's still a great album. You know, like, as much as subjectively, I would, like, if it was just, like, how I feel, I would put it in could have been better or very solid. But, like, just looking at it from an outside view, like, it is a really solid album. You know, I mean, it's got sicko mode. What more could you want? But I personally don't go back to it as much as I think. Like, I go back to Rodeo more than I do Astroworld, but it's still like a phenomenal project and like wild. Like, it's in a time where Travis Scott has already affected rap so much, to still be like completely innovating and changing things like this late into his career is kind of wild to think about. So it's a really good project. It's just I'm not the biggest fan of it personally, but I do still think it's good or great. Even without it being my personal favorite of his. So, next up we have Atrocity Exhibition by Danny Brown. And this is one of those albums that I think is really good, but like, relax. You know what I mean? There's a certain fan of rap that has appeared ever since Fantano has come along. That just like, oh God, like experimental Fantano fans ruin certain artists for me. Like, legitimately, for the longest time, I refused to listen to JPEG Mafia because of fans like that. Like, I don't want to get into it because it's a long rant. But anyway, Danny Brown, Josh Exhibition, very, very good experimental project. It's kind of wild. Some of the stuff that's going on is insane. With tracks like Ain't It Funny, or oh my goodness, Really Though, stuff like that. Like, Really Though is the highlight of this album for me. That song is crazy. I love Earl, and I've never heard Earl rapping like that before. Like, it's kind of wild. But I really love, oh my goodness, I don't remember the name of the song, but the one that starts with, I'm like cool brick with two bricks. Like, that song goes crazy. Like, it's for like a super experimental project. It has a lot of like pretty solid like and catchy songs, which is wild for Danny Brown. But I think it's his best album easily. Amazing tracks, very, very good all around. Lots of like deep stuff going on. But I'm not exactly going back to it all the time. You know what I mean? Like, because the whole album is a lot. But the highlights are very, very high on this album for sure. Next up, we have Dark Paradise by Big Sean. And, like, honestly, I don't hate this album. I'm not gonna lie, I don't hate it. I know a lot of people hate on Big Sean just because it's fun to hate on Big Sean, but like it's not terrible. Like it obviously it could have been better, but like there's some really solid songs on here. Like obviously you have like Blessings and I Don't Fuck With You and all that. But like songs like I Know and Research are like kind of cheesy, but I really like them. Like I don't know, there's something about this album that I actually dig. But you know, it's Big Sean, so like how high on the tier list can it be? Even though Big Sean does have some really solid songs and solid projects, so like I'm not saying Big Sean's a bad artist by any means. I think he just gets hated on a lot and has a bad reputation kind of for no reason. People treat Big Sean like he's Jack Harlow or like like G-Eazy or something, and like they should be taking him seriously. But he's a really solid artist. So Dark Paradise, I mean, it could have been better, but like there's still some solid stuff on there for sure. Next up we have the Black Panther soundtrack, which I guess technically is a Kendrick album. But I love this album. Like, I think it's legitimately great. I come back to it all the time. I have it on vinyl. There are so many good songs on here. Like, it's wild. You have songs like a Big Shot, X, Paramedic, All the Stars, the song with Vince Staples, the song with Khaled and Ray Shrimmered, song with Georgia Smith. Like it's like every song on this album is good. It's wild because it doesn't feel like a real album since it's a soundtrack technically, but like wow, it goes crazy. It absolutely goes crazy. Like if you've never heard this thing all the way through, please do, because it's really good. And I go back to it quite a lot. It's just because I think it's a soundtrack album, it doesn't have like that impact that a lot of the albums at the top here do, because it's not being categorized the same way, at least the way I've seen it talked about. But just like sonically, this album is great. Like don't sleep on it. Next up we got Blank Face, and I think Blank Face is just very solid. I know a lot of people will say this is Q's best album and is like a classic and all this, but I really don't see the hype with it personally. It's kind of similar to Melodic Blue in that sense of like, I know a lot of people like it, but I personally just don't get it. I've listened to it a few times. Obviously you have some really good songs in here, some of Q's best songs, but like as an overall project, I really don't go back to this one that much. So I don't get the hype with it. I think it is still like a really solid project. It's not bad by any means. Just for me, I don't think it's his best. So that's just how I feel. But if you want to say I'm wrong and want to dislike the video for it, hey, you do what you gotta do. Don't let me tell you what to do. Next up we have Black Swan by Smino. And this one is also extremely underrated. Smino just as an artist is so slept on. It's ridiculous. I think a lot of people, like, if you know with Smino, you know what I mean? Like, if you don't like Smino's music, it's not for everyone. It is very sexual, which is not something I'm super into. But, like, Smino's just doing it for the culture. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what to tell you. I feel bad because, like, if you're not black, it's hard to like super get into Smino's music because he's talking about a lot of black issues and black subject matter. So like I'm not trying to gatekeep him by any means, but you know he's definitely not for everybody. But even so slept on. Like this man put Amphetamine and Anita on the same album. That's crazy. That's crazy. And then there's still other like 17 or 18 tracks, like, and it's only like an hour long or something. Like it's got all these songs and it's like a quick listen, relative. So shout out Smino, very good project, very underrated. If you haven't heard it, please check him out. Next up we have Chitty Bang with his Breakfast album. And like I can't in good conscience put this very high, but I loved this album. Like, Like, this album just represented my childhood. Those of you that played Madden 12, Mind Your Manners, put me on to Chitty Bang. And, like, he just made a lot of just, like... I guess the best way to describe it is if Amine wasn't that serious of an artist. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's got, like, these fun... Or it's kind of similar to Kyle's music. But, like, not nearly as consistent. So you just have Chitty Bang... this rapper producer who all their songs are fun, they're well produced, like it's all solid, but it's nothing crazy, you know. It's nothing groundbreaking. There's not a lot of theming going on or substance. It's just like, hey, fun rap songs to throw in the background, like go for it. And they're always like super upbeat, and it's just a fun album, you know. It's just a fun album, but I can't in good conscience put it very high. Next up we have Ginger by Brockhampton. And I honestly think this one is also very slept on because Brockhampton makes so much music. I think it's hard to like properly appreciate their music because it's there and gone so quickly and they're on to the next thing. But like Ginger is really good. The more I go back to it, I'm like, oh my god, is this their best album? Like it goes crazy. Like it's wild to have like Sugar and Boy Bye and a bunch of other like really solid songs on the same album, especially going through such an emotional time that they were going through when they made this, is wild. So I think this album just gets better with time. We'll see where it ranks like in like 10 years or something, how much people are talking about it. But for now, I think it's really slept on and underappreciated. We're going on the Brockhampton run. Oh boy. So next up we have Iridescence by Brockhampton, and I think it could have been a lot better. To be fair, like, especially speaking of Ginger, Iridescence was like right in the middle of everything happening. Ginger was them like coping with it and finally like moving on to the next step, but Iridescence was like at the peak of all of the controversy and all that. So, like, obviously, I imagine it'd be pretty hard to pump out an album at that time. And I think that it obviously showed. I really do not go back to this album at all, other than, like, tape and occasionally Jover just for Joba's verse. But obviously, I think they get a pass just because of everything that was going on. But even with that said, it's not the best. It's not their best stuff. It's not bad. But it could have been a lot better. Next up we have Saturation 3 by Brockhampton. And honestly, I know I'll probably get a lot of dislikes for this ranking. I think it's a classic. This is easily one of my favorite albums of all time. And legit, when I say no skips, this album has no skips. Every song bangs. Every single one of them. Because normally with Brockhampton, like, they have a ton of bangers, but there's one or two songs where you're like, okay, we didn't need that. For every like star, there's a Gamba, or like for every Tokyo, there's a Tupac, or like whatever, right? Like there's usually one or two songs that are not great on each Brockhampton album. But with this one, I'm telling you, every song goes crazy. Like it's wild. It's wild. I don't understand how they made this in such a short amount of time, but it's crazy. I think it's a classic. It is so good. Again, tell me a song that isn't good on this album. Try to find a singular song that isn't good. I'll wait, because they're all great. Even though I'm not a Bareface fan, all the Bareface songs are just okay. But even the Bareface song on this album goes crazy because the second half is them rapping and the beat goes crazy on that part. Like, it's just so good. It's so good. I love Saturation 3. Again, I'll probably get some hate for putting it this high, but that's just how I feel. I think it's phenomenal. Next up is Saturation 2, and I think it's pretty great. I don't think it's better than any of the albums up here, but I think it's really, really good. With the Saturation series, I think they just got better and better. And while I just mentioned, yes, this one does have a miss or two, it's still, for the most part, all quality, all really, really, really good. When you got songs like Junkie and Tokyo and stuff like that, it's hard to miss. but they do have a couple. And that brings us to Saturation 1, which I think is a little bit better than Saturation 2, just because this isn't their debut album. They did have it was the Yellow album. I'm blanking on what it's called. But this is the album that put them on the map. This is they're technically their debut as far as like popularity goes. And to come out with this is pretty wild. Like, it's pretty wild to have, and I think the album literally starts with like Heat, Gold, and then Star, like back to back to back, which is crazy. That is such a wild opening run. And yes, there are a few misses on this one, but I think the highs of this one outweigh the highs of Saturation 2. So that's just how I feel, though. Next up, we've got Call Me If You Get Lost by Tyler, the Creator. And I think this is also really, really good. I don't think it's a classic just yet. It could be. It very well could. I think in 5 to 10 years, we could look back and say this is a classic. There's a very real world where that happens. I don't think we're there yet, though. It is phenomenal. So many good songs. And then you have like your slow songs that are also really good, like Sweet and Wilshire and stuff like that. But like the highlights of this for me gotta be, Run It Up. Like, even though I don't listen to Lumberjack that much, the bars on Lumberjack are amazing. Lemonhead, Corso, all that stuff, just incredible. Such a good album. Not what I expected at all coming off of Igor, but so pleasantly surprised just to hear Tyler just rapping, just doing his thing. So I think over time we'll see if it goes any higher, but for now I think it's great. So next up, we have the Carter 3, and I think very obviously this is a classic. I don't think it's GOAT tier personally. I get the argument for it being one of the greatest albums of all time. I think it's just classic, though, for me. Because I don't go back to this album as much as I think a lot of other people do. I mean, obviously, you've got just crazy bangers of songs. Like, crazy bangers. Like A Millie, Get Money, Miss Officer, Lollipop, all on the same album, which is wild. But as far as, like, the whole project, I think for me, it's more of, like, a highlight reel than an entire celebration of the whole thing, if that makes any sense. So I don't go back to it as much as I think other people do. So I'm just going to put it in classic, but it's still at the top of classic, so it's clearly one of the best albums, but I don't think it's like in that GOAT tier. But that's just me. Next up, we have The Big Day, which is our first album in the Yikes tier. Again, I try to be more positive than anything, but this one is not that. It's not that. I love Chance so much. I was so hyped for this album. But this is, and I know it's been talked about to death, so I won't like drain on about it. But this is easily the most disappointed I've ever been for an album. Like, it is wild because there's so much music on it. It's like, no way all of these are gonna be bad, and all of them were bad. So it's crazy. It sucks. I really wanted it to be good. It stinks that it's not very good, but hey, what are you gonna do? If you've heard Chance's singles he's been dropping recently, it seems like he's gonna be dropping an album soon, and it might be pretty good. So fingers crossed for Chance making a comeback, but only time will tell. Next up, we have Coloring Book, which I just said I love Chance, and I'm tempted to put it in classic, but I don't think it's there yet. I think it's at the top of great. I know a lot of people get turned off by a lot of like the Christian or like gospel influence on this album, which I get it. If you're not religious in any way, I wouldn't knock you for like knocking points off this album for that. But for me, I really like it. I'm not like into Christian music or like gospel music very much at all. But I think the way Chance does it makes it a lot more appealing. And then you've got just super highlights like Finish Line, both the Blessings tracks. There's a lot of like good slow jams and all that stuff. No Problems, all that stuff. Like it is such a great album. I'm a little biased because this album came out like I think a week before my graduation. So this was just like my summer anthem, and like I think a lot of people are very oddly nostalgic for summer 2016. I don't know what it is. about the summer of 2016, but something about it just was magical, and this album was like the anthem for that. So I love this. I have a lot of love for this album. But if you're not a big fan of it, I can understand that. But for me, I think it's a great album all the way through. There are a few misses, but for the most part, it's really good. Next up, we have Acid Rap, which also is a very, very good project. I think there's an argument for classic, but I wouldn't put it that high. I think it goes here. I do think Coloring Book's a little better. I know that's probably a hot take because most people think Acid Rap is his best. But Acid Rap is amazing. Don't get me wrong. It is also a phenomenal project. It's just, for me, I tend to go back to Coloring Book more than Acid Rap. I mean, I think Acid Rap does have higher highs than Coloring Book, but I think Coloring Book is better all around. Acid Rap, amazing mixtape. I know 10 Day technically put Chance on the map, but this really blew up Chance and took him to the level of stardom he's at now. So it's a phenomenal project. Next up, we have Cherry Bomb by Tyler, the Creator. And I think this definitely goes into the could have been better tier. I do think it's better than these albums. But it's just, it was very like sharp U-turn for Chance that I don't know if a lot of us were expecting that. Man, this kind of came out of nowhere, but there are some highlights. I think a lot of people like Fucking Young, even though it wasn't my favorite song. And it has Smuckers on it though, which is one of Tyler's best songs ever. So, I mean, Lil Wayne really got on that song and said, "I'm staring at a tramp on lean, make my eye jump." That's crazy. So it can't be that bad because it's got Smuckers. But other than that, I think this is one of Tyler's worst albums. But I mean, it's like a transitional album. I think it was just a lot of experimenting and messing around, and it led to where he is now. So I don't hate it. I think obviously there's just a lot better Tyler out there. Next up, we have Camp by Childish Gambino. I think this album is very slept on. I love it. But it is like, there is some cringe on it. So I can't, as much as Gambino's my favorite and I love him, I can't put it that high because there's definitely some stuff going on here where you're like, that didn't hold up super well. Similar to Born Sinner from J. Cole, like some of it is really good and some of it is yikes. So because it's so hit or miss, I can't put it super high, but I do think the hits are so good that it's slept on, because like people like this album, but a lot of people don't. So I don't know. I think it's underrated. If you haven't heard it in a while, give it a shot, because you know, songs like Bonfire, of course, a lot of people have heard, but like songs like Sunrise and That Power are just so good, and like I don't hear anyone talking about them. So shout out to Camp. It's one of my personal favorite albums, but I can't put it super high. Next up is Awaken My Love, which I don't know why I put this on this list, because it's not a rap album. But I think I just was listing artist discographies. I just kind of threw it on here. So that's my bad. But I do think it's still great, though. Like, I got to put it at the bottom of great because it's not a rap album. But for what it is, it's phenomenal. It's shocking how well Gambino is able to do so many things and just seamlessly become an R&B singer and just absolutely nail it. I mean, this album's got Me and Your Mama and Redbone on it, so I think that speaks for itself. It's pretty good. But again, this isn't an R&B tier list, so that shouldn't have been in there, but whatever. Because like I specifically didn't put like Frank Ocean and SZA and like other, and like Doja Cat and other like rapper / R&B artists, because I categorize them more as R&B than anything. So that album should be in there. But hey, whatever. Next up is Sylvia Demo by Isaiah Rashad. And this album is definitely also very slept on. This album is really good. With songs like Heavenly Father and Shot You Down, Isaiah is just rapping on this project, and he's going crazy. So if you've never heard this, definitely give it a listen. I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised by how good it is. So shout out Isaiah. Speaking of we have The House is Burning, which I'm a little biased because I had this as my personal album of the year last year. This is my most played. I do think it's just great though. I don't think it's a classic just yet, but there are a lot of songs I really like on this thing. And I mean, he sampled the TikTok, the rainbow TikTok on here. I mean, like, what more could you want? it's so good. But there's just a lot of like really chill, laid back jams. They've got a couple bangers on here too. Like, I think this album is everything you'd want from an Isaiah Rashad project. I think it's going to be pretty hard to top this album. I think this might be peak Isaiah. But I'm excited to see what he does in the future. So in the next 10 years, whenever we get another Isaiah album, because he tends to take a while, I'll be excited for it. So yeah, shout out Isaiah. Next up, we have 3:15:20 by Childish Gambino. And as much as I love him, I think this could have been better. It's like, you know, it's kind of similar to Untitled Unmastered in that way of like, it feels more like B-sides or like abstract stuff. But the songs that bang on this album go crazy. Like 1910 is such a good song, and the one with 21 and Ariana, those are really good too. And it's got some highlights, but it's so abstract, so out of the box even for Gambino, that I think it's hard to recommend, and it's definitely the album I go back to the least out of all of his projects. So I think it could have been a lot better, but it's just okay. There's nothing too crazy going on here. Even for a Gambino stan, I can't put it that high. Next up we have DiCaprio 2 by Jid, which is honestly, I don't think it's a hot take. This is a great album. I think it goes right around here. Or actually, no, I'd put it like, yeah, I put it there. Amazing project. So many good songs, barely any misses, and even the misses aren't exactly misses. They're just not as good as the other highlights on it. But just, it's such a good album. Jid is incredible. I can't wait for his next album, whenever that comes out. The features all do their thing on this. There's a lot of like good singing on it. The production goes crazy. Like, it's just a great album all around. I love Strawberries, Westbrook. There's a few other tracks that I'm blanking on. But it's such a good all around project. So shout out to Jid. Can't wait to see what he does. Next up, we have another like more obscure album on here. We've got Genesis by Damo Genesis. I don't think it's just okay. Not a lot to say about this one. Like, when I first started getting into Tyler the Creator, I listened to a bunch of just Odd Future stuff, so that's why this is on there. But it's not the best album at all. There's not a lot to it, but there's a couple fun songs, like Dapper with Anderson .Paak, and Coming Back with Mac Miller. And like, it definitely was carried by the features, but like, Damo can rap. It's just, you know, he feels like a very generic rapper compared to everyone else on this list. So I can't put it that high, but it was a solid project for sure. Next we have Dark Lane. I think this is Dark Lane Demos by Drake, and I think it's just not the best. It, like, comparatively, it's better than these albums, but for Drake's standard, it's just, again, I hate using this term because it's so overused, but it's very mid, which, again, I don't like saying, but it just came and went, and like, who was talking about this? You know what I mean? Like, who cares about this album only a couple years after it came out? You know what I mean? Like, the track with Giveon was really cool. And like, it's not bad. Like, it's Drake, so of course there's gonna be a bunch of good production, and like, it's gonna sound good. But just like, for Drake, I think this was just very, very forgettable. And again, I'm holding Drake to a huge standard because he's obviously one of the best rappers in the game. So like, again, even though this album is better than these projects, like, for Drake's standard, I think it has to go in this tier. So you might be looking at this tier list and being like, looking at it at the end, like, why is Dark Lanes down there? But that's just how I feel. So speaking of Drake, we're going on the Drake run here. Next we have If You're Reading This Is Too Late. I think this is also a great album. I don't think it's Drake's best. I know some people argue it's his best as far as just like rapping goes. But it's got a lot of really good songs. It's Drake, so of course there's gonna be a bunch of really good singles. But just like as far as like his pure like actual rapping, this is really good. Like it is surprising how hard he's going on this album. But again, I do think there's better Drake out there though. But for Drake, even so, this is still one of his best albums. And I guess it's a mixtape, but you know. Next up, speaking of Drake, we have Take Care. Which I think Take Care is very easily a classic. I do. I think it is, like, I think at this point most people would agree it's a classic. But I don't think we talk about like how much this album changed things. Like I think this album, like yes, Thank Me Later was also very big, but this album like solidified Drake as like the guy, and then he has not let go of the throne since then. Not to say that Drake is the best album or the best rapper. But he is the most popular, and I think this is the album that really put him there on the throne per se. And it's got classics, it's got bangers. I mean, obviously, as much as things like Marvin's Room get memed on, like songs like Highlights or Headlights, or one of the two, Highlights, you know what I mean. And the song with Entre 3000 and Lil Wayne and like there's just Lord Knows might be one of Drake's best songs. Like it's just got bangers after banger after bangers, even if they're like slow songs, slow bangers. You know what I mean. It's a classic. There's an argument for it to be in the GOAT tier. I don't think it's there, but it's a phenomenal album. Next up, speaking of Thank Me Later, we have Thank Me Later, and it's hard to. I actually don't know where to put this, because I'm tempted to put it on Slept On, but it's not. It's Drake. How could it possibly be slept on? I think it just goes in very solid. It's got a lot of like hit singles and like big songs, but again, it's Drake, so of course it does. But like, you know, I don't think people like talk about this one that much in the grand scheme of things. Like when you think of like the best of Drake, I don't think this album comes up. You know what I mean? At least for me, at least how I view his discography. But there are some really good songs in here. Like it sounds good. It's good all around. But like it's nothing crazy. You know, it's just a very solid project, which is why it goes in the very solid tier. Next up, we have Views, which seems to be a pretty controversial one. But I know it just said it's Drake, so how could it be slept on? And it's not slept on, but I do think it's underappreciated. I think Views is a really solid album. Like at the time, I get the hate for it because it's Drake, so he's doing the thing where he's like biting other people's flows and their other styles. So the argument is like, Drake, why don't you just do your own thing as opposed to copying what other people do? But that's kind of what most rappers do as they get older. Like you look at like what Kanye does and what Lil Wayne does, and you gotta adapt as time goes on. So I don't think Drake gets enough credit for that on this album, and there are a lot of bangers. Like you got Feel No Ways, Weston Road Flows, Too Good, like just a lot of really solid songs. And yes, you do have your one dances and things like that, but I think this album is definitely underappreciated. Like it's not slept on, but it like I don't think it gets the credit it deserves because it's a very solid, like a very good project. So shout out to Views. Next up, we have 2001 by Dr. Dre. Obviously, this is a classic. I don't think there's much debate on that. But like it's one of those things where with a lot of these like a lot older classic albums, for someone like me, I don't go back to it that often, but it's hard to deny how good it is, especially for the time. Because I mean, you got songs like Still Dre, Forgot About Dre, Difference is the Differences, or What's the Difference? Sorry. Like is one of the best beats I've ever heard, The Next Episode, all stuff like that. So it's like obviously a huge classic. But for me personally, like I'll take all of these before I take this. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know how to describe it other than, hey, it's a great album, it's a classic, but it's not my personal favorite. Next up we have, I think it's D-Day, or Judgment Day. I think it's D-Day, that came out this year, the Dreamville mixtape with DJ Drama, I think. And I think it's very solid. It's nothing wild. Like there's a lot of really solid songs on here. And it's a great bump in the whip kind of project where you just jam out and listen to it. But I don't know how much longevity it's gonna have. I think there's for Dreamville. I think it's doing a very good job of solidifying them as one of the best labels in the game right now. But I don't know. It doesn't seem like something that's going to have a lot of longevity. Obviously, it just came out a couple months ago, so we're going to have to give it some time. But for now, I think it's just very solid. It's nothing crazy, though, at least for my opinion. However, speaking of Dreamville collaborations, Revenge of the Dreamers, I do think over time has gotten a lot better, and I do think it is a great project. I think it probably goes there. And it's got some of their best songs, even though it's like a collaborative project. Like, arguably, Sacrifices is the best J. Cole verse ever, and then everyone else in that song goes crazy, like Smino, and like Saba's my favorite part of Sacrifices, and it's one of the best songs on there. You have like Wells Fargo and Down Bad and Under the Sun, and just like banger after banger after banger. Got your slow songs with Jid and T.I., and like the R&B tracks with Ari Lennox. It's just like, it's such a good project all the way through, and it's kind of shocking how good it is, because I feel like when it came out, like, it didn't have as big an impact as I thought it would, but over time I like this album more and more and more. So I think it's a great project. Shout out Revenge of the Dreamers. Next up, we have Sick by Earl Sweatshirt. And I think it's just very solid. I think it probably goes here. At first, I really like this album, but over time, I'm not as into it as I thought it would be. I love Earl, so I was gonna like it regardless. And it's good to hear Earl like rapping again, because coming off of some rap songs and Feet of Clay, he's been going very much into that like melodic, like hug the microphone, like almost like mumbling kind of flow. So it was good to hear him more like pronounced. But even then, like it wasn't as memorable as I wanted it to be. Like for the albums of 2022, this might be the one I go back to the least so far. So I do think it's still solid and like a good step forward for Earl, but it's definitely not his best. Which, speaking of Earl, we have Doris, which I do think is his best. And I think Doris is great. I really, really, really like this album. I think it goes here. Just a lot of banger. And like, I go back to this album a lot. And like, the more I go back to it, the more I like it. With songs like Sunday and Night and Chum, and Whoa, and just like so many good songs. The features all did their things on this one. Like, I love Damo's feature and Frank's feature. It's just a really, really good project overall. So I feel bad though, because I feel like this set the bar kind of high for Earl, and I don't think he's lived up to it since. Well, we'll get to that. Actually, never mind. I forgot about that. But like, this style of Earl is my favorite for sure, because he's changed a lot over the years. But I do think Doris is a great project. Next up, we have EP. It's either EP or LP by Childish Gambino. And I think it's just very solid. It's very short, concise, but like most of the songs bang. So like, what more could you want? It's just like quick, easy. It all sounds good. They're all fun. All the beats are really good. Freaks and Geeks is an amazing song. The production is crazy. Like, it's just a really fun, solid project that you'll probably enjoy. So if you've never heard it before, check it out. I think it's EP by Childish Gambino, but it could be LP. And yeah, very solid project. Next up, we have Everything for Sale by Boogie. And this is incredibly slept on. Or West Side Boogie, I forgot to change his name. West Side Boogie is so good. Like, I cannot wait for him to drop an album. I have no idea when he's going to. He's been doing some freestyles on radio shows, so I'm hoping it's soon. But this man is so talented, it's crazy. He just needs to drop more music, and then I think he could be up here. But he hasn't made a ton of stuff, so we're just waiting on to see what he does. but I think Everything for Sale is a great starting point. I know he's had like mixtapes before, but I believe this is his first studio album. I could be wrong. But yeah, Everything for Sale, amazing projects, some really, really fun songs, song with Jid. I'm blank, The Ride, or Ride Home, or Silent Ride, that's what it's called. I was like, what is the song called? It's just such a solid project all around. He's a great lyricist, great production, great flows. Like, I'm telling you, man, don't sleep on West Side Boogie, or stop sleeping on him, because I do think he's very slept on. Because I think he's the next thing. He could be the next big rapper coming up, so we'll see. Next up, we have God Don't Make Mistakes by Conway. And, like, all of Griselda's stuff is good. Like, all of Griselda's stuff is really good. But I do think this one in particular, like, was shockingly good. Because the thing with Griselda is, like, okay, you know they're going to be on those grimy beats. You know they're going to be rapping. You know they're going to have good bars and, like, drug references. But, like, how much range are you getting from a Griselda project? And this one has a lot more than I thought. Like, for Conway to make a song like Stressed is wild. Like, I never would have thought in a million years that Conway would make a song like that. And especially, I'm a little biased because I just saw it in concert, but it's so good. And I think this whole project is really, really good. I think it's his best project so far. And again, I cannot wait to see what Griselda does in the future, because everything they make is just, it just bangs. All their stuff is good. So shout out Griselda, specifically Conway, because Conway's my favorite in the trio. Next up, we have Good For You by Amine, which also is very slept on. A lot of Amine stuff is going to be slept on. But I do, I don't know if this is the hot take or anything. I do think this is his best album so far. I know a lot of people say Limbo is, but for me, I really, really like Good For You, and I come back to this album a lot. With songs like Veggies, obviously Caroline, Sundays, like there's a lot of good tracks here. And it's got a good mix of like just fun bangers and like stuff with a lot of substance. So again, Amine, super slept on. If you haven't heard any of his albums, please check him out. He's very good. Next up, we have What Would Sheen God Do by Griselda. And I'm very, very, very tempted to put this in classic. I'm tempted. It's up there. Like I think it's legitimately like here. Every song on this album goes crazy. The production is insane. Their flows are insane. They're just trading back and forth. It is so good with songs like Dr. Bird's, and Scotty's, and I'm blanking on some of the tracks because Griselda makes so much music it's hard to remember the song names. But like just a whole album of all three of them going back and forth is insane. Griselda, fantastic project. I would love for them to make another group project like this. I know they're doing their solo stuff, so you know, what can you do? But this is a phenomenal album. If you haven't heard it and you like rap, like aggressive rap, check it out. It's so good. Next up, we have The Off Season by J. Cole. Jermaine Cole. Young Simba, Mr. Nice Watch. And I think it's gotta go in great. I like with songs like My Life and like Applying Pressure, 95 South, like it was so good to hear him just rapping again. You know what I mean? Like kind of similar to what Tyler did on Call Me If You Get Lost, but just like going hard, doing his thing. Very, very refreshing to hear. Because like, you know, sometimes I think J. Cole gets wrapped up in trying to be too lyrical and too substance based, like thematic based. But like sometimes you just want to hear rap. And that's what he's doing on this album. So I think it's a great album, and I think it probably goes here. Yeah, great return to form for J. Cole. Next up, we have Ghetto Gods by Earth Gang. Again, Earth Gang, very slept on. Please check them out. I think this is their best album so far. Like, I think Earth Gang continues to get better and better. You got songs in here like Black Pearls, Amen, some just absolute bangers. Their production is amazing. Their flows are amazing. Like, I'm just excited to see what Earth Gang does in the future. And this is a great step forward. So shout out Earth Gang. They're doing their thing. Please pay attention to them more because they're very good. Next up we have Tennatalk 4 by Benny the Butcher, who again with Griselda, all their stuff is really, really good. Like what more could you say? You know what I mean? It's that hard stuff. It's gritty, great wordplay, great production. But for me personally, Benny is my least favorite member in Griselda. I love all three of them, but if I had to rank them for me, it would go Conway, Westside, and then Benny. Because I feel like Benny has the least versatility of the three, and I really appreciate versatility, as you could probably see from the top of the list. I think that's very apparent. So it's just more of what Benny does best, just rapping, flowing, doing his thing. But it's nothing crazy. You know what I mean? It's just a really, really, really solid project all around. If you like that kind of stuff, you're gonna like this. But it's not like, I'm not like, oh man, can't wait for another Tennatalk 5. Like, you know what I mean? Because we know what Tennatalk 5 is gonna be if he drops it. Like, it's gonna be more of the same, but that's a good thing because it's the same good stuff. So shout out Benny. Next we have Ramona Park Broke My Heart by Vince. I really like this album. I like this album a lot. I personally think this is Vince's best album, which is kind of wild because a lot of people think Summertime '06 is his best, which I understand. But yeah, I think this is a phenomenal album. I think I'm gonna put it like right in the middle of great because I think it's a classic. But just all the songs are great. This is Vince's best produced album. All of the beats go crazy. It's got some really fun wordplay and some substance to it, because of course it is. It's Vince, and it's such a good project all around. Like it is so good. Shout out Vince. Again, can't wait to see what he does in the future because I don't know how he's gonna top this. Like I think this is a phenomenal album. Oh boy, next up we have Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers by Kendrick, and I think it's really early. It's really early. This album is only about a month old. I don't even think it's been a month yet, but I think it's a classic. I mean, it is Kendrick. We're talking about one of the GOATs here. But like, this is a phenomenal album. Yes, there are problems to it. Do not get me wrong. Do I like Auntie Diaries? No. Do I like the message to it? Yes. Do I like how it was done? No. But like, there's just so much good stuff here. I think like, obviously like Auntie Diaries, Crown, there's a couple songs, like the Kodak feature was whack. Or not that it was a bad feature, but the fact that he featured Kodak on there, I don't agree with. So like, it's not perfect. But the stuff that is here, the highs that are here, like We Cry Together, like Father Time, like Count Me Out, are so good. And I think are already better than Damn, personally. So obviously only time will tell with this, but I think it's already a classic, personally. So that's Mr. Morale. Next up we have I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside by Earl Sweatshirt. And I really like this project. I think it's pretty slept on. There's definitely some kind of odd stuff going on here with like him talking about like women and there's certain topics where I'm like, where are you going with this, Earl? But like the highs of this album are really, really, really solid. Songs like Grief, Faucet, AM Radio, the song with Vince, like it is a very solid project, but I don't hear people talk about it a lot, especially because of another Earl album that we'll get to that outshines this a lot, because I think for a lot of people that think of Earl, it's either some rap songs or it's Doris, and this one kind of gets lost in the mix. So I think it's very slept on at this point, and a really solid album. Just a couple of the subject matter I'm not a fan of. Next up we have Igor, which, no surprise, is obviously a classic. But I think it's already in the GOAT tier. I really do. This whole album bangs, absolutely no skips. The theming and the lyrics are incredible throughout the entire album, how it all flows together, and this whole narrative is painted for you as it goes. And they're all bangers. And he's flowing on it. The production is great. Like, it is wild. Like this whole album is just like an achievement. This whole album is a flex for Tyler, and I think this is very clearly peak Tyler. I mean, we'll see what he does in the future, but like, I think this is already easily a classic, and it's already one of the best albums I've ever heard. So, shout out Tyler, doing his thing. Next up, we have Illmatic by Nas. Obviously, this is a classic. I think that goes without saying. For me personally, it's not like the greatest of all time for me. I totally get the argument for it. Like, I think it's very obviously like high up in the classic tier. But I don't go back to this album as much as I'm sure a lot of other people do from different generations. Like, obviously, like this song or this album's got "The World Is Yours" on it. Like, that is one of the best songs I've ever heard. Absolutely amazing song, and a bunch of other bangers. And he started with this, which is wild. So obviously it's a classic. If you were to put it in GOAT, I would totally understand that. Just not from me personally, but obviously it's still a classic, one of the best albums. It's just it's not my personal favorites. So shout out Illmatic, phenomenal album. Next up we have oh my goodness, The Divine Feminine by Mac Miller, R.I.P. I love Mac Miller so much, and I think it just goes in very solid. I was tempted to put it in slept on / underappreciated, but like I went back and listened to it last night, and there's only a few songs I really go back to. Like, obviously, Dang is the best song off this. It's an incredible song. But like songs like Stay and the one with Kendrick are a lot better than I remembered. But it's still like, for the highs that Mac Miller hit, I don't think it's as good as his other albums. But it's still very solid. Like, again, it probably seems a little weird because Very Solid is on the lower end of this tier list. But this isn't a bad tier by any means. Like, if we were doing this in more like traditional tier list ways, Very Solid would be like B tier. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a bad place to be. It's just I think there's a lot better Mac Miller out there, and plus, like, I get the point, but the amount of just like sex noises, I'm like, Malcolm, please, like, stop this. I don't want to hear this all the time. Like, I get it, you have sex with people, that's great, but like, relax, you know. Next up, we have The Sun's Tirade by Isaiah Rashad. Which I also think is great. I love Isaiah, so I'm a little biased, but I think this is a phenomenal album. And I was tempted to put it in Slept On, but I think it's better than that. Like, it is legitimately great. There are so many good tracks on here. Free Lunch, For the Squad, What's Wrong, Silk the Shaka, like, so many amazing songs. I think this is peak Isaiah, or I guess in the ranking I have The House is Burning higher. Because I do think The House is Burning is better, like, overall, but the highs of Sun's Tirade are higher than the House is Burning, if that makes any sense. At least just how I feel about it. But yeah, Sun's Tirade, incredible project. Sucks we have to wait 5 years for every Isaiah album, but it's a banger. Next up is KOD, which I think goes in the could have been better tier. It's definitely, again, we're scaling this to the artist, not the entire stuff. So, like, I think this is a better album than everything else in this tier. But, like, for J. Cole, I mean, like, how often do you go back to KOD? You know what I mean? Like, I'll go back to Born Sinner more than I'll go back to KOD. And, like, yes, like, ATM and Motivate are, like, really good songs. And, like, I guess not really a diss track, but, like, the, like, scolding track to Lil Pump and stuff is a good one too, but like it has the least replay value out of all of J. Cole's albums for me, so I think it could have been a lot better, but it's still not bad by any means. It's just okay. Next up is Jesus King, and I think this also goes and it could have been better. I'll put it right here. And, like, I think most people would agree this is Kanye's worst album. I definitely agree there. It could have been a lot better, but there are some really good highlights, like Follow God and On God specifically is my favorite song. Pierre went crazy on that beat. Like it's just like there is good stuff here, but it's just the lows are obviously like Closed on Sunday single-handedly drags this album down a tier. If that song did not exist, I'd put it in very solid. That's a tough one. That's a tough one to to have to deal with. So, you know, what can you do? But Jesus King goes there. Next up, we have The College Dropout. And if you think I'm putting this in anything other than classic, you're crazy. Like, regardless of how you feel about Kanye as a person, this is one of the greatest rap albums ever made. I really don't think there's any argument to it. It is crazy that he started with this. Absolutely. Like, how do you start it, like, your career with a song like Last Call? That's insane. And then also there's Spaceship, All Falls Down, Through the Wire. Like, this album is insane. Like, the more I think about it, the crazier it is. It is not my favorite Kanye album, but I do think it is easily one of the greatest albums of all time, and is just phenomenal. Obviously, there's some skits and a lot of interludes and like I guess like filler, but all around, this is an incredible album. Incredible. Speaking of incredible albums, and some of the greatest albums of all time, we have To Pimp a Butterfly, which, just like College Dropout, I think no debate is a classic and no debate is one of the greatest of all time. Now, for me personally, I like, because it's such like a piece of art, I don't go back to it as much as the rest of these albums because I just enjoy them more sonically. But just as a like achievement in music and art in general, I like, it has to be one of the greatest of all time. It is insane. I do think it's better than Good Kid, Mad City. I enjoy these two. These are my two favorite albums ever, so I can't put it higher than this. But like objectively, I think it has to go somewhere in this range. To Pimp a Butterfly is incredible. The amount of innovation, experimentation, emotion, like deep themes, tying everything together, all the like intense subject matter. It's just incredible. Like it's wild this album exists. You know what I'm saying? So it's got to go in the greatest of all time. Stay with Kendrick. We have Untitled Unmastered, which is also pretty wild to think about how good this is for a B-side album. But I think it just goes in very solid towards the top, because like the fact that his B-sides are better than so many other artists' best work is crazy. But that said, at least for me, this is easily the album I go back to the least. And like it's just solid. But that said, Untitled 2, Untitled 07, all bangers, and the whole album just slaps. It's just, you know, it's so much lower on the scale of Kendrick because he has such high like conceptual and thematic albums that just having like a random selection of tracks isn't going to live up to that, but it's still like quality all around, you know? So I think it goes into very solid. Next up we have Kids See Ghosts by Kids See Ghost. And I think it's also just very solid. I truly do not get the hype with this album. Like, obviously, Melon gave it a 10 out of 10. A lot of people love this album. A lot of people like think this is one of Kanye's best. And I really just don't get that. Maybe I'm just not understanding it. Like, it is cool that it's short and sweet, and like Kanye and Kid Cudi is always a good combo. But like, other than Reborn, that's really the only track that like really resonated. The rest of them are good, but again, this doesn't seem like Kid Cudi or Kanye's best work at all. And I think they both can do a lot better and have better tracks together than what's on here. Even though, again, Reborn is a phenomenal track. But other than that, I just think it's solid. Like, it's not bad. All that to say, it's solid. But I don't think there's anything crazy going on here, like a lot of people do. Next up, we've got Kyle. Surprise to see him on this list. But we have Kyle, See You When I'm Famous. And I think this is just could have been better. Kyle as an artist, I think that could be said. But it's just okay. There's a couple really good songs. I really like Girls with Rico Nasty. I like What It Is. Like, it was just like a very chill project. There was some like fun, heartfelt tracks, a lot of fun bangers. But it like wasn't any. It very much came and went. I think not just for me, but in general. So, Kyle, nothing too crazy, but a solid project. I think it could be better. Like I don't know what peak Kyle is, but I want to see it. But I think he can do a lot better than this. So that's that. Next, back on Kanye, we have Late Registration, which also I think has to be a classic. A lot of people would argue Late Registration is his best album. I don't think that's true personally, but I think it is also very, very good. And I actually do think it's better than Graduation. Graduation has a lot of like the big tracks. But Late Registration is just so consistent. Like and also has a ton of big tracks. Like it also has Diamonds from Sierra Leone, We Major, Touch the Sky, like a lot of some of his like most iconic songs, and then like a couple like really good slept on songs like Gone, or like Late, and just like a really good project. Like it's like a more refined College Dropout without the highlights, without as high of highlights as College Dropout, but it's still a classic. I really don't think you can argue that it's not. And I know this is a lot of people's favorite Kanye albums, so I think it's got to be in the classics for sure. But I do think College Dropout is a little bit better. Oh boy. Speaking of Kanye, we got Drake with Certified Lover Boy. And I think it just goes and could have been better. I know a lot of people think this is Drake's worst album and that it's like garbage and mid and all this stuff. I do think this is one of the rare times that mid is a good way to describe this. But again, that's for Drake's standards, not standards of all of music, but just for Drake, this was just very middle of the road, very just like, hey, here's a few radio hits, here's some great production, some melodic flows, and let's call it a day. Like there's really not much going on here. Which stinks, because as Drake is the biggest artist in the game, you want there to be more, ideally. But again, Drake has mastered the formula of what he's going to do. He's going to put out like solid radio music that is very like digestible, and that's that. So that's pretty much what CLB is. And if you want more, you got Drake's old stuff. So next up we got Bobby Tarantino 1 by Logic. Which I think it's also just could have been better. It's I believe this is more of a mixtape than an album, and it's meant to just be like some bangers, some chill tracks to have in between his big studio albums, I believe is the goal. And I think it does that well. It's nothing too crazy. I think it's probably like here, or like there. I think Jesus King is a little bit better, but. Yeah, it's really there's not a lot to say about the Bobby Tarantino albums. Like they're just fun, like energetic projects to be there as filler for the next stuff. At least I think that's what it's there for. I don't think they're supposed to be these like super deep musical experiences, but I could be wrong. But Bobby Tarantino is solid. Nothing crazy about it. Just we've seen a lot better from Logic, so I think it goes in the could be better tier. Next up, we have The Lost Boy by Corday. And this is one that it's kind of tricky to place. But I'm gonna say it's slept on / underappreciated. Like when it came out, it had a ton of hype. Then I feel like no one really talks about it that much anymore. I could be wrong, but at least I don't hear any of the people in my circle bringing this album up, even though it's got some really good songs on it. The song with Anderson .Paak, the song with Chance, a couple of the solo songs in there. Like, Corday can definitely rap. He's got really good production on here. He's got great lyrics. It just is like,
it felt like a really good starting. I know he's like not just starting now, he's been around, but this felt like a really good starting point for whatever he's gonna do next. I haven't heard his album that came out this year, so I don't know how it is in comparison to this. But I think this was a really solid album all the way through. It's just, you know, nothing too crazy. Next up we have Humaniac by Lou the Human. I haven't heard too much of Lou's music. This is the only thing I've heard, and it's pretty wild. But I can't in good conscience put it over anything in the Very Solid tier. I thought about putting it in Slept-On, but I think it just goes in Very Solid. Lou the Human's music is wild. It's a lot of like Eminem-esque bars of like just like ridiculous, crazy. Like he's very much putting on a character. So like for that, it's good because it is really reminiscent of like Slim Shady style Eminem. But the main criticism I've heard is that it's too much like that, and it's like too much of like an Eminem copy, which I definitely get the criticism for that. But for what it is, I think it's good. He's got some hilarious lines in there. The production is pretty solid, but it's very short and just like a quick character album kind of thing. And I haven't really heard much from Lou since. I don't know if he's dropped any big projects since then, or since this came out. But this is a very solid project for sure. Next up, we've got Circles by Mac Miller. And I personally am just a little opposed to posthumous albums in general. But I think, and I do think Circles is a bit overhyped, personally. Like, I know a lot of people were very emotional when this came out, and rightfully so. R.I.P. Mac, he was an amazing person. But even with that said, it is a beautiful sentiment, but the actual music itself here, I don't really go back to very much at all, personally. I know a lot of people have a big personal connection to this album, especially because it came out during quarantine, and like people were very attached to things that they had during that time. So if you love this album, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's bad by any means, but I just think it's solid. You know, Hand Me Downs is probably my favorite track on here. But overall, I do think it sounds like a posthumous album and things that were very much in the works and then were just thrown out there. But for what it is, I think it's really solid. Coming straight off of that, we have Swimming, which I feel very differently about. And I think Swimming's a classic. I really do. It's close to GOAT tier, honestly. But I think, like, for me, it goes like here. Like, I think Swimming is really, really good, and it's one of those albums that just gets better every time you listen to it. Whether it's like the intro track, Come Back to Earth, or Hurt Feelings, or 2009, or whatever song it is. Just every song, there's so much like raw emotion in it, and like to see Mac Miller's growth to this point is so cool, because I'm sure when he started his career, not a lot of people thought he would get here, and it's really cool to see him at this point. So yeah, of course, you know, you got songs like What's the Use and like some more upbeat tracks, but all around, I think this is easily Mac Miller's best project, and just a phenomenal album overall, and a modern classic, honestly. Speaking of Mac Miller, next up we have Faces, which for a while I did think was his best album. Over time, like I just said, I think Swimming is his best, but Faces is really, really good. I don't know if I could put it in classic, but it is so good. I'm so glad they released it onto streaming services, since it was a mixtape, but like, there are so many good tracks on here. I think his best beats are on this album. And it is so good. Like he's rapping so well. He does have some fun character stuff there. He goes into a lot of like depressing themes and stuff. And it's just overall such a fun project. And like, whereas Swimming, I think, is the better album and like the better art, Faces is like, Mac is rapping on this album. Like he's going hard. And it's really cool to see. So I think Faces is great. Alrighty, next up we have Mad Villainy by the Mad Villain himself, MF Doom. And I think a lot of people not a lot of people. I think this is definitely a classic for sure. I do think he has a project better than this personally. And this isn't my favorite album by him, but it is just objectively like an incredible album. Like it is it is pretty wild that he had songs like All Caps and Meat Grinder and Raid, and all that, Accordion, like all of that on the same album. Obviously, MF Doom, one of the best lyricists, wordsmiths that we've ever seen. R.I.P. And this is, a lot of people would say this is peak MF Doom. And if you feel that way, I definitely can't blame you, for sure, because it is a certified classic. No doubt about that. Next up, we have Melt My Eyes, See the Future by Denzel Curry. And this did also just come out, so we'll see how much people like it over time. But I think for now, this is easily a great album, for sure. And I do think Ramona Park is my favorite album of this year, so I should probably do that. But like, of these 3 albums that came out this year, amazing start to the year 2022 so far, now that we're officially halfway through it now. I just checked the clock and it's June. But anyway, Denzel Curry, I think this is his best album. Again, the growth with him, he's already been one of the more consistent rappers in the game, but to see him evolve to this point and have songs like Walkin' and Ain't No Way, Mental is a great track, all that stuff on this project is really, really, really cool to see. And again, just makes me excited for the future, because this was a great album, and I think he just keeps getting better and better, so I'm excited to see where he goes from here. Next up, we have From a King to a God by Conway the Machine, and I think this is also a really solid project. I don't know if it's up there with great, but it is really, really solid, and it's definitely slept on, 'cause I think a lot of Griselda stuff is slept on at this point. But I think it probably goes like here. There are some really solid tracks on here. Again, Griselda, you know what they're going to be doing. It's just gritty rap over some gritty beats, and it's going to sound great. But the main track for me, the one with Freddie Gibbs, is pretty good as well. But I Already Got It, that song goes crazy. It was really fun to see in concert. So shout out Griselda and Conway, just quality all around. Next up, we have Food by MF Doom, just talking about him. And for me, this is MF Doom's best album. I think Food is amazing. And I think there's a legit argument to put it in the GOAT tier. Like, it is really, really good. But I think it just goes here, personally, for me. Standout tracks, Potholders, Rap Snitch Knishes, One Beer, obviously. Just tons of amazing songs. And again, the wordplay here is incredible, to have it all flow so well. Every line rhymes, then everything is like a tie-in to food again. Like, it's crazy. Everything, like, what MF Doom does is truly wild. And I think this is his best work. A lot of these songs are, because the thing with MF Doom, it is experimental, so there's gonna be a lot of beats that are gonna be a turnoff to, I guess, more casual listeners. So to hear MF Doom just popping off like this over some more like commercial beats is really, really cool. And again, he brings his A game here, so I think it's his best album. Next up, we have Nujabes, which this is the only album I've ever heard from them all the way through. I know Nujabes has done a lot of like influencing over other artists here, but I don't know if it's great, but I do think it is very slept on for sure, because I think a lot of people have heard a Nujabes song, but don't actually like know who that is. So it definitely needs more attention. And it's just such a chill album. Like, this whole album is just like, you could just throw it on to, like, in the background of anything that you're doing, and it's going to be super enjoyable. All the performers on here did the thing. All the beats were really cool. It is just like the chillest album. Like, it's very similar to Isaiah Rashad's stuff, where it's just like very, very nice to have on, and just enjoyable all around. So shout out to Nujabes. Next up, we have More Life by Drake. And I do think this one gets hated on a little more than it deserves. I don't think it's that bad. I know the whole, like, oh, it's a playlist, not an album, thing gets talked about a lot, and whatever you want to categorize it as whatever you want to categorize it as, I just think we could all agree it could have been better, you know? Again, Drake, we're holding him to a much higher standard. and this just wasn't that great. You had a couple like huge bangers. I believe Passion Fruit was on here, and Portland was on this album. So those are huge hits even for Drake standards. But the whole thing, or the thing as a whole, really was just underwhelming. And again, it really could have been better. So more life. Next up, we have Telephone by No Name, who, God, I just want No Name to make more music. Her music is so good. But, alas, anyway, Telephone is a really, really great album. I think it is wonderful. I think it goes probably here, as I do think her future album is better than this. But, like, just... she's so good. She is such a good storyteller. Everything flows so well. Her lyricism is great. The production isn't crazy, but it fits her style super well. The track with Smino and Saba bangs, because of course it does. Whenever all three of them are on a song together, you know it's going to be amazing. And it's just like such a great project. Nothing but good things to say about this one. If you haven't heard it, check it out. Telephone by No Name. Very, very good. Next up, we have Pink Friday by Nicki Minaj. And... honestly, I think it's great. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, Pink Friday is one of those albums that, like, when you look back on it, you're like, holy, like, she had all these songs on the same album? That's crazy. And, like, just banger after banger on this one. And, like, I could be wrong, but I believe this was one of her first albums. So to come out early in her career with this is wild. And it's just, everything is so catchy. She's flowing really well. The production is super smooth. And I would put it in the slept on tier because I do think it's very underappreciated. But, like, I just think it's great overall. So shout out to Pink Friday. Like, Nicki Minaj doing her thing. Oh boy. Next up, we have A Whole Lot of Red by Playboi Carti. Which, like, regardless of where you stand on this album, it can't be as bad as people say it is, and it can't be as good as people say it is. People will say this is the worst album I've ever heard, and people will say this is the best album ever made, and it is not either of those things. Like, it is just insane, like, how much variance there is with Whole Lot of Red. But for me, honestly, kind of wild. But I prefer it to Die Lit. I don't think it's a classic. I would get the argument for it, but I personally don't think it's that good. But I do think it's great. Like, there's just... I don't know what it is about Playboi Carti's music, because I've talked about this with other artists before on this list. Of, like, sometimes I just don't get it. Like, whether it's a Baby Keem, Melodic Blue, or it's... an XXXTentacion or whatever it is. Like, I just don't... or like a Blank Face with Schoolboy Q. Sometimes you just don't get why people like stuff. You know what I mean? And, like, I really enjoy A Whole Lot of Red, and I truly could not tell you why. Like, it's very similar to Die Lit, in production at least. Not really the actual lyrics, because Die Lit sounds like a rap album. Whole Lot of Red is just something else. Like, it's just an experience, I think. And, like, if you like that experience, then you're gonna really like this album. And if you don't, you're gonna hate this album. So, if you try to read too much into it and the lyrics and all that stuff, then I get it. If you're a lyrical spiritual miracle and you need all that good stuff to enjoy rap, then this is definitely not the one for you. But I don't know. Just this album is so fun. It's so energetic. I love the production. Pierre Bourne is legend. And I don't know. I think it's really good. I think it's a great album. And if you hate it, I'm sorry. And if you think it's the GOAT, I'm also sorry. Because I probably pissed off everyone who has an opinion on this album. But I just think it's great. So, next up we've got Pray for Paris by Westside Gunn. And I think this is also great as well. As far as, like, their solo albums, I think Westside Gunn has the best projects, but I do think Conway is the best member of the group. And Pray for Paris is no exception to that. This album slaps. The production on this one is amazing. It has some of their best songs with 327 and George Bondo and stuff like that. But again, it's just Westside Gunn doing his thing, once again proving why he is one of the most consistent rappers in the game. Just an amazing project. Next up, we have Professional Rapper by Lil Dicky, which is going to be our second album in the Yikes tier. Oh boy. What is there to say about Lil Dicky that hasn't been said already? It's just, you gotta pick a lane. You either gotta be full comedy rap, or you gotta be full rap. And to be the guy that's making all the jokes, then also be like, I want to be taken seriously. It's not good. it's a tough look. It's a tough look for Lil Dicky. So I do think Lil Dicky can flow. Like, on his freestyles, like, he'll be rapping. I know some of, like, not some, all of those are written verses, and some of them are from songs. But just, like, I don't know what it is, what he needs to do, get better production or whatever it is, but I just know this is not it. I'll tell you that much. There's a couple fun songs on there, but just overall as an entire project, it's not great. It's not great. A lot of the jokes don't land, and the raps aren't very good on top of that. So, Lil Dicky. Next up, we have LP by JPEG Mafia, and similar to a whole lot of Red. If you think this album is the greatest of all time, I don't know what to tell you, because it's not, at least in my opinion. But I do think it's great. I do think this is a really solid album. This is the first album by Peggy that actually, like, clicked for me. And because, like, for the longest time, I had mentioned it earlier, JPEG Mafia's fans really turned me off to his music, to the point where I was like, I actually didn't like him. But finally, with LP, I was like, hey, let me really give this guy a chance. And he came through. A lot of great songs in here. My favorites, OG, Damn Damn Damn, What Kind of Rappin' Is This? Just, like, really, really solid. His production style is wild and really fun to listen to. And Peggy can rap. Whether it's Hazard Duty Pay or Bald or whatever it is, man's got bars. So shouts out to Peggy the GOAT, even though he's not the GOAT, at least in my opinion. Next up, we have The Sideline Story by J. Cole. And I think this just kind of goes and could have been better as well. I think it goes to the top of could have been better, but it's like, looking back on it, it's definitely similar to KOD, and that, like who's really going back to this album? I mean, maybe some people are, like some of the diehard J. Cole fans, but other than, like, Dollar and a Dream 3, and I think Workout was on this album, but it just, it for J. Cole standards, it felt forgettable. Like, it's still better than a lot of other rap albums out there, but like, compared to his discography, I think he could do a lot better than this, which is why it's in the could have been better tier. So, next up, we've got 10 Day by Chance. And honestly, even though, like, this obviously put him on the map and kicked off his career, I still think it's slept on. Like, 10 Day has a surprising amount of replay value. That's why I'm putting it here in the slept on underrated tier. Like, this album slaps, dude. Whether it's Brain Cells or, oh my goodness, I can't even think of songs off the top of my head. But there's a lot of songs in here where you go back to and you're like, wow, like, for a high schooler, this is pretty good. Like, I'm kind of shook. And this was, like, very much wacky Chance, you know, with acid rap coming right after this. You know, he's a lot more, he's a lot younger. And he's just, like, so energetic that it's super infectious. And even on the more slower songs, he's surprisingly introspective and a really good lyricist, even at a young age. So I think 10 Days really slept on. It's not his best by any means, but really solid overall. Next up, we have Limbo by Amine. And I think it just goes in very solid. I prefer pretty much every other one of his projects other than this, even though I think most people think that Limbo is his best. Just for me, I don't know. There's something about it that it doesn't, like, because it's got bangers, it's got great production, like, he's rapping well, he's flowing well. Pressure in My Palms is by far my favorite song on here. And, like, Riri was good, and, like, there's some really solid tracks. But I just, personally, I'm just not the biggest fan of it. I don't really know what else to say. It's just not my favorite. But I do think it's still really solid. It's not bad by any means. But it's not exactly what I'm looking for from Amine personally. Next up, we've got Ready to Die by Biggie Smalls. And obviously, this is a classic. I don't think I need to say much more than that. It is very, very good. I'm going to put it here, I think. Actually, I'm going to put it here. Like, with a lot of the older rap, it's not really my style, as you can see from this list. There's a lot more modern stuff. But this is just insane. It's pretty wild to think about. He had Juicy and Big Papa and Suicidal Thoughts and Who Shotcha like on the same album, which is wild. So I think this is his best work easily. I don't think it's a hot take, but you know, it's a classic. It's Biggie Smalls. It's peak Biggie Smalls. Notorious B.I.G. What more could you want? You know. Speaking of older rappers, we've got Jay-Z with Reasonable Doubt. Which I also think is an undisputed classic. And I don't really think it can be argued. I think it's probably here. For me personally, I prefer the albums above it more. But again, when you got, like, this man started with Dead Presidents on his first album. That's wild. Like, how do you come out of the gate with Dead Presidents? That's insane. And he's also got Can I Live and Feeling It and the track with Mary J. Blige. And just a lot of people say this is Jay-Z's best album. I don't know if I feel that way. Probably. I'm not like super versed in Jay-Z's discography, as this is the only album of his that I have on here. But overall, it really, really good. Obviously a classic. Can't go wrong with Reasonable Doubt. Next up we have Recovery. Which I have a personal tie to it because it kind of goes with these albums over here, and that it just Recovery was like a big album of my childhood for some reason. I don't know what it was, but like from ages like 10 to 13, I was blasting Recovery like every day. And it's obviously not Eminem's best by any means and could have been a lot better. But I'm a lot more fond of this album. It has a lot of nostalgia for me. So I know some people want me to put it in not the best or yikes, but I don't think it's that bad. Like it's got some fun tracks on there. It's got some really iconic songs. Just again, for Eminem's standard, not great. But for anyone else, wouldn't be a bad album. But shout out to like Call of Duty and all the things that kept promoting this album so much. Speaking of Eminem, next we have Revival, which definitely also goes in the yikes tier. At least with The Big Day and Professional Rapper, like, they're clearly trying to be more silly and more fun, and it's like they're not taking it super seriously. Oh boy. Revival is just tough. Like, again, I don't know what I could say that hasn't been said already, but Revival is just not a good album. So The Big Day was most disappointed I've ever been by an album. Revival is the worst album I've ever heard all the way through, where like I was listening to it and not even halfway through, like I actively wanted it to be over. Like it just is not good. Like sure, there's a highlight or two, but like, oof, I even the biggest Eminem stans, I don't think can defend this album. Like it's pretty rough. So tough to see Eminem go out like that. Obviously, we know he's put out other stuff, but it's still tough. Next up, we have Roadrunner by Brockhampton, and I think Roadrunner is like on paper it's great, but I don't really come back to this album that much. But I'll say it's slept on / underappreciated. I know it just came out, so it's hard to call it that. But again, for Brockhampton fans, I feel like people don't really talk about this. And there were some really good songs on it. Obviously, Bankroll, Chain On, The Light was really good. The deluxe version with Bow Wow was one of my favorite songs. And like, there's just a really like good amount of bangers. But for a Brockhampton project, I don't want to say it was forgettable because that's probably too mean, but it did feel like it kind of came and went. And again, I know that they've got a lot of stuff going on at this point. But it was good, but it could have been better. But also, like, it's underappreciated. Like, I don't even know what to say about Roadrunner. Like, I got a lot of feelings with this album, but I do think it is good and worth a listen for sure. Or like the Windows is a great song. Like it's a weird, I don't know how to describe it, but it's got some good songs and I like it. And if you haven't heard it, you should check it out. So yeah, that's where it's gonna go. Next up, we've got Room 25 by No Name, who again, No Name, if you're listening to this for some reason, which I highly doubt, please make more music. Your music is so good. I think this is even better than Telephone, and is a wonderful album. I think it probably goes here. But yeah, Room 25 is great. It is such a good listen. Again, the production got even better. Her flows and her lyricism is incredible. Again, the song with Smino and Saba goes crazy. Just a great project. And again, we need more No Name. Please. I just want more No Name. Is it that much to ask for? Next up, we've got Good AM from Mac Miller. And I think this is another very, very good album by him. I'm tempted to put it in Slept On because I do think it is very slept on. But I just think it's a great album. Before Swimming, I thought this was in contention for his best, with songs like Perfect Circle. Like, you just get to see this crazy emotional side from him. And specifically Perfect Circle, like the second half of the song, Godspeed, it is kind of haunting to go back and listen to it because he essentially, like, to the T, predicts his own death and how it's gonna go. A full, like, 4 years before it happens. It's really wild. But other than that, though, there's a ton of, like, really fun bangers. Break the Law, Clubhouse, just some really solid songs in here. And again, very much a product of Mac Miller's evolution. So great album. Really cool to see him continue to progress. Next up, we have No Pressure by Logic. And I don't know if this is a weird spot because I think Very Solid is too low because I do think this might be his best album. But it's not slept on because, like, obviously it made a lot of noise when it came out as his, like, retirement album, which we know isn't true anymore. But for that, it was really good. I'm just gonna put at the bottom of great. I feel great, like, in a relative term, but it is a very good, very solid project all around. The production on here is wild. Songs like Aquarius 3, No Pressure intro, Perfect. There's, like, a lot of really fun, well-produced tracks here. And again, it's really cool to see Logic be more... I mean, I think Logic has always been more of a down-to-earth kind of guy, and, like, I'm a regular person, just like you. That's kind of his brand. But, like, to him be so personal and, like, honest about, like, being nervous to write certain lines because people think it's going to be cringy and stuff like that is pretty cool to see from an artist. Obviously, I'm a little biased because I'm also biracial, so, like, I'm gonna have a soft spot for Logic. But I do think it's a really solid project. It just barely makes the great tier, so shout out to Logic. Next up, we have Oxymoron by Schoolboy Q, and here is where Schoolboy's coming in. I think this is also a great album. And I think it's his best, honestly. Like, Schoolboy is rapping on this album, and the production is super fun. You've got huge hits, like Man of the Year and stuff like that. Like, this is such a good all-around project. Again, it's got that, like, grimy, hard feel to it. But it's some of his best stuff, or I think it is his best stuff. And Schoolboy Q, just also a very consistent, really solid rapper overall. TDE are just stacked. Well, they were. So, also, speaking of Schoolboy Q, we have Crash Talk, which I do think is really slept on, honestly. I think a lot of people were underwhelmed by this album because it had more of a commercial feel to it, as opposed to his normal, like, super, like again, grimy rap. But I thought it was really good. Like, even for it being more commercial, I think he handled it super well, and is a really solid album overall. Yeah, you got a couple, like, odd songs, like Chopsticks and whatnot. But I think overall, tracks like Num Num Juice and Attention and Crash are all really, really, really good. And I don't think it's as good as Oxymoron, but this is a great album. Or I don't know about great, but very, very good. So, shout out Crash Talk. Next up, we have Scorpion, which also I think it has gotta go in the could have been better tier. Again, some people will say this is the worst album. I don't think that's the case. It's just, I imagine it's got to be pretty tough to release an album after your whole career gets completely attacked by Pusha T. Like, I don't know how I'll follow that up. And Drake clearly didn't either, because he used the amazing beat to Emotionless to address that, and it didn't go very well. Like, I wasn't hiding my kid from the world. I was hiding the world from my kid. Like, yeah, okay. Okay, Drake, sure. But, other than the Pusha T stuff aside, it was produced really well. The whole concept of, like, half of it being rap, half of it being pop, is kind of interesting, but it just wasn't great. You do have a couple, like, huge songs in here, but those were added after the fact, I believe. Or like they were singles from before the album, and then he threw them on the album, like God's Plan and stuff like that. So on paper, it's got some really good songs, and like stuff like Sandra's Rose are really good. But again, for Drake standards, I've been saying this a lot, but it could have been better. We know it could have been better, and it wasn't. But it's Drake, so it's gonna sound good, and it's gonna be produced really well. So there it is. Next up, we have A Few Good Things by Saba, which, I don't know if it's great. I think it's going to go at the top of Slept On. Like, even though Saba's been doing this for a while, and I think he's getting a lot more attention now, like, he is still slept on in the grand scheme of things. There's still a lot of rap fans that do not know who he is, and that's criminal, because this man is a great rapper. He's got amazing production, great lyricist, like songs like 2012, Soldier, Circus Interlude. Like, there's a lot of really good songs on here. But I don't know if it's great just yet. Over time, I could easily see it going into the great tier. But for now, I think Saba, just as an artist, is the definition of slept on. But over time, I think that album can move up pretty quick. Next up, we have Section 80 by Kendrick. And I think this also is a great album. For Kendrick standards, like, I think most people agree this isn't one of his best, but it's just like a really good project overall. So I do think it's a great album. But I don't know. I've never really like gravitated toward this album much at all. Like, I listened to it. I like Rigor Mortis. But like, other than that, there's not a whole lot of good stuff here. I think High Power is on this album, I think. But like, easily, I think this is his worst album of all of them, like, by far. Which is saying something, because it's still a great album. You know what I mean? Because I'm not really counting Untitled Unmastered. Again, I assume that's more of just a B-side. But like, all of his like fully released projects, I do think this is easily his worst. But that said, for your easily worst album to be at the top of great tier is still insane. So Kendrick, again, if you think he's the GOAT, I don't blame you, because I might too. Again, with Kendrick and Kanye, I kind of go back and forth. But anyway, next up we have Smile by Kyle. And I just think this is a really fun project. I don't know if it's as good as anything in this tier, so I think it's going to go in very solid. But it's just like, again, Kyle just makes really fun, energetic, like nothing too deep music. And for that, it's really good. Again, he makes like that nerdy dude music, which is right up my alley. So I'm going to like it. Like, I'm the definition of the target audience here. But like with songs, like Really Yeah and Keep It Real and stuff like that. Like this album is just super fun. Don't Want to Fall in Love, all that stuff. Like, it's got some really fun production, really energetic, and it's nothing crazy, but it's a solid album. It's a good time. So shout out to Kyle. Next up, we have some rap songs by Earl Sweatshirt, and I I get why people think this is the best album. Personally, I still prefer Doris just a little bit over some rap songs, but I still think this is a great album. Like it took me a while to like this because it's such a drastic like style change from I Don't Like Shit Outside to this. But once you get used to it, it is really, really good. And songs like The Mint and Riot and On the Way, and just there's a lot of really, really good songs here. And again, the stuff he's talking about is pretty heavy and pretty personal, so to hear him open up like that is really cool. So if you say this is Earl's best album, I couldn't dispute that. Just I prefer Doris a little bit still. Just it's more my style. But either way, I think they're both great albums. Next up, we have Stone Mountain Kawaii by Childish Gambino. And I'm a Gambino stan, so I'm gonna be positive. But I just think it's slept on. I think it's very underappreciated. It's the album I easily hear talked about the least by Gambino, and that's not even close. Like I think a lot of people don't even know this album came out. And if we're talking about the mixtape and the album, I think it goes in a great. But just so many people have not heard the mixtape that it's like tough to argue it. But some of the mixtape songs are so good. Like this was the last of rapping Gambino that we got, which really, really stinks. But for what it is a really solid album. You got stuff like can't even think of any of the names of the songs. Pardon Him. The song with Jaden Smith that he's rapping on that's really good. The 3005 remix. Sober. Some really, really good songs on here. So I think it's super slept on. If you never heard this one, definitely check it out. On like streaming services, it's only going to be Stone Mountain, so I think it's only 6 or 7 songs. But if you look up the mixtape, the mixtape is Stone Mountain, the album is Kawaii. So if you look up the mixtape Stone Mountain on like Dak Piff or something, or just YouTube, we'll probably have it. Check it out. It is really good. But again, since most people don't know about that, I can't really put it super high. But I love Gambino, so it's slept on for sure. Next up, we've got Summertime '06 by Vince Staples, which I also think is a great album. And a lot of people think this is his best, and I don't think that personally, because I just think he's been getting really good recently. But I do think it's a great album. Summertime '06 goes crazy. Some absolute bangers on this one, like Senorita, and oh my god, North North, and just like this is exactly like this was when Vince really came into his own and like solidified his style for years to come. And it's a great album overall. And again, just the more you go back to it, most likely the more you're gonna like it. So shout out Summertime '06. Next up we have Sire by Jaden Smith. And I definitely think this could have been better. Again, it is Jaden Smith, so I don't know where exactly the expectations were for this album, but it's not bad. Like I think people hate on it a lot just because it is Jaden, but like some of the songs on here are really good. George Jefferson, Icon, like it is produced super well. So when you have something that good, it's kind of hard to fumble the bag too hard. But with that said, still could have been a lot better. So excited to see what Jaden does in the future. But Sire was just okay overall. Next up is the Carter 5. And I think this also could have been better. I'm tempted to put it not the best, but I don't think it's that bad. It's just for being an album in a series as notorious as the Carter series. If you're gonna make a Carter album and you're Lil Wayne, you gotta bring it. You know what I mean? You gotta bring your A game, and that is not what the Carter 5 is. I know when this came out, a lot of people thought Lil Wayne was washed and like this was it and all that stuff. But I think especially now with a lot of the features he's been doing on like Tyler the Creator stuff and Griselda stuff, Wayne is definitely back. But Carter 5 just wasn't great. It could have been a lot better. But just a lot of missed potential on this one. But I do like the song with Kendrick, though. That's a fun song. Next up, we have The Adventures of Bobby Ray by B.O.B. And I think it's really slept on. Listen, this is another one of those songs or those albums that is just like the perfect encapsulation of my childhood. Like I legit remember playing Club Penguin and listening to this album, but like it's so good. Like it is surprisingly good. It's such a fun album. It's got a lot of replay value. Even now, I was listening to this album like a week ago. It is really good with songs like Magic and Kids. I think Airplanes was on this album, and like just like some really, really huge songs that like the second you listen to them, you'll just be warped to like the year 2011. But like, again, it's not great by any means, but I do think it's slept on because obviously nobody is talking about B.O.B. anymore because he's a flat earther for good reason. But like, still, like, so this album alone, surprisingly good. If you haven't heard in a while, give it a chance. It slaps. It slaps. In stark contrast to that, next up we have The Chronic by Dr. Dre. And obviously The Chronic is a classic. I don't think I need to convince anyone of that. I personally prefer 2001 over The Chronic. But I mean, it's The Chronic. Like, what are we talking about here? Obviously it's a classic. Like, there's nothing more to say. Next up we have The Heist by Macklemore. And it's just not the best. It's just not the best. Honestly, there's some solid tracks on here, like some fun songs, but it's Macklemore, and this won the Grammy over Good Kid, Mad City. So I think that speaks for itself. Why? It's insane to think about. And the fact that he like put out an apology to Kendrick should tell you enough. You need to know. But again, this isn't like a garbage album. It's just, I don't even know what to say about it. Like, I'm trying to be positive here. I'm trying to be positive because there are a couple songs I like on it. But oh boy. Next up, we have The Incredible True Story by Logic. And I think this one is also very solid. It's nothing too crazy. I think it goes about here. But it's a solid project. There's a lot of fun songs in here. I really love Run It. And there's a few other ones that I'm blanking on. But it's Logic doing Logic things, a big conceptual album here. And like, or not conceptual, but more just like thematic. And it's just like a really solid Logic project. Nothing crazy. I'm not going to blow your mind, but just a fun project, great production. He's rapping well, doing his thing. Next up we have The Life of Pablo by Kanye West. And this is one of my favorite, like, other than My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, this is my second favorite Kanye album, personally. But as far as where to rank it, it's tough. Because the highs of The Life of Pablo are so high, but the lows are not great. So as far as where to rank it, I don't know. I really don't know. Oh my goodness. Because like you have songs like Real Friends and No More Parties in LA, and Ultralight Beam, and Father Stretch My Hands, and 30 Hours, like some amazing tracks. But then you also have like your Freestyle 4s and your Panda song and like I Love Kanye and stuff like that, where you're just like, why is this here? Oh my, you know what? I'm gonna do it. I gotta follow my gut on this one. For me, this is a classic. This is a classic. I love this album. What can I say? This is my list. I think it goes there. But my goodness, I love this album so much. 30 Hours, I think, had the potential to be Kanye's best song he ever made. If Andre 3000 actually had a feature at the end, it would be so good. But even without that, it is one of his best songs. Real Friends is such a good song. Kanye, when he's vulnerable, is amazing. And a lot of people love St. Pablo. Again, No More Parties in LA. Him and Kendrick actually just like going crazy, and such a fun song to sing along to. It is just the highs. Again, the highs of Life of Pablo are so high. But if you don't like it because of the lows, I cannot blame you. But for me, it's a classic. So, next up we have the Marshall Mathers LP2. And honestly, like, I think it's genuinely slept on. Like, it's kind of wild because it's Eminem, so like, how could it be slept on? But I think it's similar to Views in that when it came out, a lot of people wanted it to be like incredible, and it wasn't, so people were hating on it. But over time, the Marshall Mathers LP2 is a really solid project, especially compared to like a Revival or a Kamikaze or whatever. But like, I think over time it just gets better and better, and it's got a lot of really solid tracks on here. But my favorite, of course, is the one with Kendrick, and I just think it's slept on. So shout out to the Marshall Mathers LP2. Next up we have Care For Me by Saba, which this might be a hot take, but I think like, already this is a classic. This is an absolute classic. This is such a good album from start to finish, and Busy/Sirens is one of the best songs I've ever heard. And it gets even better in the Tiny Desk version. If you haven't seen Saba's Tiny Desk on NPR, look it up right now. I'm telling you, it's so good. Like, it is incredible. And this album is phenomenal. Again, Saba, absolutely amazing storyteller and a rhyme writer. Just such a good artist. And again, I know we just got an album from him this year, but I can't wait to see what else he does in the future, because Saba is incredible. And I think this is his best work so far. Next up we have Birds in the Trap by Travis Scott. And I just think this is a solid project. It kind of reminds me of Untitled Unmastered in that, not that it's B-sides, but in that, like, you have some really great songs here, but overall, I think a lot of people, when they're going to go listen to a Travis album, they're going to pick Astroworld or they're going to pick Rodeo. I don't think they're going back to Birds in the Trap too much. But that's just my opinion. If you're a big Travis Scott fan, you love this album, let me know, because I haven't heard that much about it. But, I mean, it's got Goosebumps. So that alone puts it in very solid, because that is a amazing track. But shout out to Travis. Next up we have Nothing Was the Same. And I think this also is a classic, and I think, for me at least, compared to all those albums, I don't know. But I think it is really close to the greatest of all time tier. Like, I think this is Drake's best album. It is incredible. So many good songs in here. The production goes crazy, because of course it does. But when you start off with something like Tuscan Leather, and then you have Furthest Thing, just so there's so many good songs in here. It's wild. Yeah, there's a miss or two. I know a lot of people don't like Wu-Tang Forever, and songs like that. But then you got songs like Come Through and Too Much and From Time, and so many good songs on this. I think this is his best album by far. Or not by far. I that's a little too much. Take Care is still great. But I think this is a classic, and I think this is peak Drake. So we'll see if he can get back to this level. I don't think so. But if he can get back to this version of Drake, ooh, the future is bright in Toronto, I guess. Next up, we have Vince Staples by Vince Staples. And I also think this is great. Like, I don't know what it is, but Vince has really won me over in the past year or so. And I think this is a legitimate great album, and like one of his best for sure. I think it goes about here, because I do think Remote Park is a little bit better. But like, the production on here is so good. The beat to Law of Averages is like one of my favorite instrumentals of all time. Sundown Town is great. Like, the only problem with this album is it does start off super hot and then kind of cools off as it goes on. But I do think it's a great album overall. And again, Vince just getting better and better as we go on. Next up, we have Watching Movies with the Sound Off by Mac Miller. And I just think it's solid. I don't have too much to say about this one. I think Red Dot Music is the best song on here. And I know a lot of people love this in retrospect. But I feel like it was getting pretty negative reception when it first came out. And just like posthumously, people love it. But he can do a lot better than this. But even so, I think this was like the turn from his, like, you know, like frat rap, like party dude, to a more serious artist. I think this was the turning point for him, and this is where we first start to see him grow. For that, solid album. Next up, we have "Watch the Throne" by Kanye and Jay-Z, and I like the amount of bangers on this album. I don't think you can say it's not great. Like, I know for Kanye and Jay-Z specifically, it's not as good as their solo stuff, but like they really put Otis and the song about them being in Paris on the same song or on the same album. That's crazy. And then you have "Gotta Have It" on there, and this album was just like such a moment. It's crazy, but just the absolute like star power and like "No Church in the Wilds" and all that stuff. Just like the amount of bangers on this is insane. Shout out to Jay-Z and Kanye. I was tempted to put it in Slept On, but I mean, it's Jay-Z and Kanye, so how slept on can it be? Next up, we have Watsy with "Cardboard Castles." And speaking of slept on, I think this album is criminally slept on. It is so good. I know a lot of people don't take Watsy seriously because, you know, he's a YouTube rapper, he's an internet rapper. But this album is so good. Like, I have a lot of nostalgia for it. It came out at a very good time for me, like when I was like first going in high school and stuff. So it means a lot to me personally. But some of these songs are incredible. "Tiny Glowing Screens" Part 2, "Strong as an Oak," "Sloppy Seconds," "Hey Asshole" is an amazing song. Like, there's just some really, really good songs on here, and it's a great overall project. For just, you know, like being young and figuring things out, which I think pretty much everyone can relate to. And it's a really solid project all around. If you've never heard it, give it a listen. Watsky "Cardboard Castles," good album. Next up, we have "Who Made the Sunshine" by Westside Gunn. And again, I'm starting to get repetitive here. But I do think it is slept on, though. Even for Griselda standards, I don't hear, like, for Westside Gunn's projects, I don't hear a lot of people talking about this one. And it is a great project. Again, it's Griselda, so they're doing their thing as usual. Great production, really great raps, great features. And this is no exception to that. I feel like it deserves more attention, though, because comparatively to his other albums, I don't hear people talk about this one. But it is really good. You got songs like 98 Sabres, Lessie, Butcher and the Blade, some really, really great tracks. So if you haven't heard this one by Westside Gunn, give it a try, because it is a really, really solid one. Next up, we have "What a Time to Be Alive" by Future and Drake. And I also think this goes into the could have been better tier. Again, it's obviously, I've talked a lot about holding these really good artists to higher standards. And this applies here, but also when you have Future here, and it still like really didn't hold up as well as I thought it would be. Like, for a collaborative album with some of the biggest names in hip hop, like, who is talking about this album today? You know what I mean? Like, obviously Jumpman was huge, and like I think like Big Rings was on here and stuff like that. But like, again, who is listening to this still? I don't know. So for these like huge titans in the rap game, I think this could have been a lot better, honestly. But for what it is, got some good bangers, obviously great production. But you know, just kind of is what it is. Next up, we have "Wolf" by Tyler, the Creator. And I think at this point, it is very slept on. "Wolf" is a really, really good album. And if it wasn't for Tyler just completely leveling up with Flower Boy and On, this would be in the running for his best album. But like, obviously he's just gotten so good that he's kind of left Wolf in the dust here. But especially when this came out, this is a really, really solid project. I know a lot of people love Tree Home 95. Answer is on here. Beamer. There's a few other songs that I'm blanking on. Rusty, I think, is one of his best songs. Like, everyone on Rusty like did their thing on that song. I think Colossus is on here, maybe. Just a lot of really, really good tracks. Colossus doesn't hold up as well, but a lot of the songs here are really, really solid. And this was like, at least for me, and I think a lot of other people, this is the first time where you heard Tyler and you're like, wait a minute, like, this guy he's not just joking around and memeing around with his friends in Odd Future. Like, he could be a really good artist if he applies himself fully, and then boom, the rest of his albums came out. But this was, I guess, Tyler's like turning point in his music, at least for me. And it gets a lot of points for that. So shout out Wolf, very slept on. Next up, we have Triple X by Danny Brown. I personally am not a big fan of this album at all. I know a lot of people I think Melon gave it a 9 or a 10 out of 10, and like a lot of people love this album. This is another one that I really don't get the hype. I truly do not understand why people like this so much. Danny Brown is still a great artist and a great rapper, but I can only hear him talk about drugs and sex so much. You know what I mean? And obviously it's rap, so like drug and sex gets talked about all the time. But like, it is, obviously the album is called Triple X, so that's going to be the main focus. But it is just so excessive, and I get that's the point, but it's still not fun to listen to. Like, you know what I mean? At least for me, I got sick of it so fast, and I really don't see how this is like one of the best rap albums of the decade. I don't get it. I really don't. If someone wants to explain it to me why it's so good, let me know in the comments. Get at me. But for now, I just think it's solid because I get what he's going for, and he does a good job at it. But it just I don't want to listen to it very much. You know. Next up, we have Yay, which I know a lot of people recently, like I when this album first came out, people were hating on it, and now people act like it's his best album. I really don't think that's the case. I just think Yay is really solid. I think it goes at the top of really solid. I don't think it's his best work at all. I think there's a lot better Kanye out there that we've already talked about. But for what it is, it's solid. And whenever Kanye is vulnerable, it makes for some of his best songs. So stuff like Violent Crimes and Ghost Town are phenomenal. But there's also other songs in this album that are not that good. And it's just not, he could have done a lot better than this, but even with that said, still a solid project. So I think it goes in very solid. But it's not the best. Speaking of Kanye trying something different, we have Yeezus, which I was originally going to put this in slept on / underrated. But again, similar to Ye, there's been a huge wave of people recently that are proclaiming Yeezus is his best album, which I truly don't know how you can get to that conclusion. But I do think it's a great album though. With all of that said, I do think it's a legitimately great album because it has maybe Kanye's best song ever, being Bound 2 on here. Like, there is truly no other song. Like, nobody in the history of humankind could have made a song like Bound 2. And yet here it is. Kanye doing his thing. But you've also got really good songs like Blood on the Leaves and Black Skinheads and On Sight. Well, I don't know about On Sight being a great song, just that one sample is really good. But like a surprisingly good album that over time and like multiple listens, it does get better. But it's still just, I don't get how people think this is Kanye's best album. I really don't. But again, it does have really cool moments. Again, like the sample on Sight, like the end of the final song, or not, what is the song? I'm blanking on what it is, but the final moment on that one song, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When he's doing the auto-tune singing, saying so long, you know what I mean. So it's got some really high highlights, but again, the lowlights aren't enough to carry it as much as something like Life of Pablo, in my opinion. Next up, we have our last album of the day so far. These ones I accidentally added, or we've already covered. We have Shut the Fuck Up Talking to Me by Zach Fox, which honestly, I think it legitimately goes in the slept on tier. Because like, as we're talking about with Lil Dicky, right? Like I was just saying, if you're gonna do the comedy rap thing, you should either go hard in the comedy or hard in the rap. Like, you gotta pick a lane. But somehow Zach Fox is just so well able to toe the line. Like, he does both really well. Like, for someone that is a comedian, he's not even a rapper. Like, he's rapping really well. Like, and it's like over an Alchemist beat and stuff like that. It's crazy to think that like that we're here. You know what I mean? Like, coming from that one cave episode all the way to here is crazy. But with songs like Fofo and the title track, and like Get Off My Dick, like there's just some like, it's short to the point and it bangs, which is crazy because this is a stand-up comedian and he's rapping and he's doing really well. So like, shout out to Zach Fox, because I never would have thought that in a million years. So with that though, that's the end of the tier list. So quick look at the final results here. We got some Kanye, Childish Gambino, 2 Kendrick albums, Lauryn Hill, Tyler, and another Kanye album in the GOAT tier, at least for me. You got a lot more classics than I thought, but we've got some great classics here. The biggest tier is the great tier. There's just a lot of really great albums in my opinion. So you can see that over there. We've got the Slept On tier, which is albums that if you haven't heard yet or haven't heard in a while, you should really check these albums out. The Very Solid tier, and just like really solid projects, good all around, but like nothing too crazy. The Could Have Been Better tier, and projects that, again, could have been better. And then we have the Not the Best and Yikes tier. So that's the end of the tier list. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far through the tier list, I can't thank you enough. Let me know if you have any tier list ideas that you'd like to see, or other stuff you want to talk about, or want me to talk about music more. And yeah, if you want to see more from me, check me out on Twitch. I don't really stream anymore. I used to, but I barely stream. But if you want to follow me there, I would really appreciate it. Or follow me on TikTok at Storm Targaryen. And yeah, this has been Tier Mania, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.